Hello, and welcome back. This Scary Stories channel explores ghosts and haunted places where something lingers long after everyone has gone. If you enjoy the stories, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. Relax and listen. Story 1. The ghost in my basement won't stop rearranging my furniture. I bought the house on Holloway Street because it was the only place I could afford after the divorce. Not that afford is the right word, more like it was the only property the bank would let me assume after my credit collapsed, my savings evaporated, and my ex walked out with everything except the dented Honda and a box of my grandfather's old tools. The realtor called it a fixer-upper with character. What she meant was it was falling apart, smelled faintly of mildew and regret, and had been on the market for 18 months because no one in their right mind would touch it. But I wasn't in my right mind. I was numb, hollowed out, the kind of exhausted that makes even breathing feel like a chore. So when I saw the listing, 3 bedrooms, detached garage, full basement, $129,000, I didn't ask why it was so cheap. I didn't tour the neighborhood. I didn't run a background check on the house's history. I just signed the papers, handed over the cashier's check from the last of my emergency fund, and moved in with 2 suitcases and a bottle of cheap bourbon. The first week was quiet, too quiet. No birds in the yard, no wind in the trees. Even the refrigerator hummed at a lower pitch than normal, like it was trying not to disturb something. The house sat at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by overgrown oaks whose branches scraped the roof at night like skeletal fingers testing the shingles. The backyard sloped down into a ravine choked with brambles, and beyond that, nothing, just woods, miles of them. I set up my bedroom on the first floor, didn't even go upstairs. The basement door, tucked under the stairs in the kitchen, stayed shut. It was an old-fashioned hatch with a rusted iron latch and a faded warning painted in flaking red letters. Keep closed. Draft risk. I assumed it was a relic from the 1940s when the house was built. Maybe the previous owners were paranoid about cold air. Or maybe they just didn't want kids wandering down there. I didn't plan to open it. But on the 8th night, I came home from my new job, stocking shelves at a hardware store, to find my living room rearranged. Not someone broke in and trashed the place rearranged. Deliberately rearranged. My thrift store armchair, which I placed facing the window so I could watch the sunset, was now angled toward the basement door. The coffee table had been shifted 6 inches to the left. The rug, crooked before, was now perfectly aligned with the floorboards. Even the lamp on the side table had been rotated so its neck pointed downward, casting a narrow pool of light directly onto the hatch. I stood in the doorway, my grocery bag dangling from my hand, heart pounding. I live alone. I locked the doors. I didn't touch anything. I checked the windows, all latched. The back door, dead bolted. Nothing was missing. Nothing broken. Just moved. I told myself it was muscle memory, sleepwalking, stress-induced disorientation. I'd been drinking more than usual. Maybe I'd done it myself and forgotten. But the next morning, I found my kitchen chairs pushed neatly under the table, something I never do. My dishes, which I'd left stacked in the sink, were rinsed and placed in the drying rack in perfect order, and the broom, which lived in the pantry, was standing upright in the corner of the hallway, facing the basement door like a sentry. That's when I decided to go down. I grabbed a flashlight, unlatched the hatch, and pulled. The stairs groaned like old bones. The air that rose from below was cool, dry, and carried the scent of cedar and something else, faintly sweet, like dried flowers left in a closed drawer for decades. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor, exposed joists, a single bare bulb hanging from a cord in the center, though I hadn't turned it on. Yet it glowed with a soft amber light, and the space was furnished, not with boxes or junk, with my furniture. My old reading chair, the one I'd left in storage, sat in the far corner, perfectly positioned beneath a cobwebbed window well. My grandmother's oak side table stood beside it, holding a chipped porcelain teacup I hadn't seen since I was 12. Even the lamp, that damn lamp, was there, its shade tilted just so. But I hadn't brought any of this down. I hadn't even unpacked it. I backed up the stairs so fast I nearly fell. I slammed the hatch shut and shoved a kitchen chair under the handle. That night, I slept with the lights on. The rearranging didn't stop. It escalated. Every morning I'd wake to find my belongings subtly altered, books reshelved by publication date instead of author. My shoes lined up by size and color, the couch cushions fluffed and rotated. Once, I came home to find my entire work uniform, jeans, flannel, steel-toed boots, laid out on the bed as if someone expected me to leave and never return. But the basement, that was the worst, because now things were coming up. A hand-knit blanket appeared on my bed, my mother's, lost in the move. A music box I'd owned as a child sat on the windowsill, its lid open, playing a warped lullaby at 3 a.m. And one morning, I found a framed photograph on my nightstand, me at age 7, sitting on a swing in a backyard I didn't recognize, smiling beside a woman who wasn't my mother. On the back, in faded ink, "Don't forget us." I called the county clerk, ran property records. The house was built in 1942 by a man named Walter Gable. He lived there with his wife Eleanor and their daughter Clara. Clara died in 1953 at age 9. Pneumonia, the death certificate said. Walter hanged himself in the basement 3 months later. Eleanor vanished shortly after. No body was ever found. The house changed hands 6 times. Each owner reported odd occurrences. One family claimed their furniture moved overnight. Another said they'd hear footsteps pacing the basement. A woman in the 1980s reported seeing a little girl in a yellow dress standing at the foot of her bed, whispering, "Make it tidy. He likes it tidy." I should have left, but where would I go? I had no money, no friends, and part of me, the broken, lonely part, was starting to like the attention. Someone was caring for me. Someone was watching. Someone knew me. Then came the night I found the note. It was tucked into my coat pocket, a coat I hadn't worn in weeks. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting delicate and lupin. "You're not sleeping well. The bed's too hard. I'll fix it tomorrow." I didn't touch the mattress the next day, but when I came home from work, the bed was made with fresh sheets, cotton, soft, smelling of lavender. The pillows were plumped, the duvet folded at the foot, and on the ejado nightstand, a glass of water and 2 aspirin. I sat on the edge of the bed and cried for the first time since the divorce, because it was kind, because it was familiar, because for the first time in years I didn't feel alone. That night I left the basement door open, just a crack. I sat in the living room with the lights off, listening. At 11:37 p.m. I heard it. a soft creak from below, then the scrape of wood on concrete, then silence. I crept to the top of the stairs and peered down. The basement light was on, and there she was, a woman in a faded floral dress, her back to me, kneeling beside the armchair. She was smoothing the fabric, tucking a loose thread back into the seam. Her hair was silver, pulled into a loose bun. She moved with quiet precision, like someone who'd spent a lifetime caring for things that couldn't care back. "Eleanor?" I whispered. She froze. Slowly she turned. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and dark, too dark, like pools of ink. But her expression wasn't angry. It was sad, longing. "You look tired," she said, her voice soft as dust falling from a shelf. "You should rest." I don't understand," I stammered. "Why are you doing this?" She stood, brushing her hands on her dress. "Walter couldn't stand mess. After Clara, he needed everything, perfect. Like if the world stayed in place, she might come back." She looked around the basement, my furniture arranged in a perfect circle, as if waiting for a seance. "I stayed to keep it that way," she said, "for him, for her, and now for you." "Why me?" She smiled faintly. "Because you don't take care of yourself, because you leave your shoes in the hall and your coffee cups on the sill and your heart in a box under the bed, because you need someone to tidy your life." I didn't run. I walked down the stairs. She didn't vanish, didn't recoil. She just watched me, eyes glistening. "I'm not staying forever," I said. "I know," she replied, "but while you're here, let me help." And I did. Over the next weeks, I stopped fighting it. I'd come home to find my laundry folded, my mail sorted, my keys hanging on the hook by the door. My plants were watered. My coffee was ground and ready in the filter, and every night the basement light would glow softly, and I'd hear the quiet sounds of someone arranging, cleaning, caring. I started leaving notes. "Thank you for the soup." "The blanket helped. I slept well." "You didn't have to fix the faucet, but I appreciate it." She never wrote back, but the next morning the notes would be gone, and something new would appear. A book I'd mentioned wanting to read, a packet of seeds for the garden, a framed photo of me smiling that I didn't remember taking. I was happier than I'd been in years. But then one night I woke to the sound of weeping, not angry, not scared, just deep, aching sorrow. It came from the basement. I went down without hesitation. Eleanor was sitting in the armchair, clutching a child's dress to her chest, yellow with tiny white flowers. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I miss her," she whispered, not looking up. "Every day, every hour. I tidy the world, but I can't tidy the hole she left." I sat on the floor beside her. "I know," I said. "I lost someone too." She finally looked at me. "You can leave, you know. Walk out that door and never come back. You're not like Walter. You don't have to stay." "I don't want to leave," I said, and I meant it. But the next morning, everything changed. The furniture upstairs was gone, not stolen, not moved. Vanished. The living room was empty, except for the bare floorboards. The kitchen, no table, no chairs. My bed, stripped to the mattress. Even the curtains were gone. I ran to the basement. It was full. Every piece of furniture I owned was down there, arranged in a tight spiral around the center of the room. The chairs faced inward. The lamps cast long, overlapping shadows. And in the middle, on a small stool, sat the yellow dress. A note lay on top. He's coming back tonight. He doesn't like mess. You have to choose. Stay and be tidy, or leave and be free. I realized then what she'd been protecting me from. Not the ghost. Herself. Walter wasn't the only one who couldn't let go. Eleanor had been trapping souls here for decades. Anyone broken, anyone lonely, turning them into permanent residents of her curated afterlife. A perfect, silent world where nothing was out of place and nothing ever changed. I ran upstairs, packed what little I had left, clothes, laptop, my grandfather's tools. I was at the front door when the clock struck midnight. Behind me, every door in the house slammed shut. The lights went out. From the basement, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, male, and a woman's voice pleading, "Please, not him, take me instead." I turned the knob. It wouldn't budge. The windows fogged over. In the glass, a reflection appeared, not mine. A man in a worn suit, rope burns around his neck, eyes hollow. He pointed to the basement. "Come down," a voice whispered, not from the stairs, but from inside my own skull. "Stay. Be tidy. Be still." I looked at the door, then at the basement, and I made my choice. I walked down the stairs, not because I wanted to stay, but because I couldn't leave her alone with him. Now I live in the basement. Eleanor and I rearrange the furniture every night. We wait for the next broken soul to stumble through the door. And when they do, we make it tidy. Because that's what we do. That's who we are. And the house is always hungry for someone to care for. With that, the story is over. Let's move to the next story. The cemetery caretaker said never read the names out loud. I didn't listen. I rented a cheap room in an abandoned house 3 miles from Blackthorn Cemetery because the rent was $150 a month, and the landlord, a wiry, chain-smoking man named Ed, barely glanced at my ID before handing over the key. "Just don't go near the cemetery after dusk," he said, his voice low, eyes fixed on the horizon where the trees formed a jagged silhouette against the sinking sun. "And whatever you do, don't read the names out loud, not even once." I laughed it off. Superstition, I figured. Rural folklore. The kind of thing people say to spook city folk who think rural decay is aesthetic. I'd spent the last 6 months chasing abandoned places, derelict asylums in West Virginia, rusted fairgrounds in Ohio, a collapsed coal mine shaft in Pennsylvania. So a decrepit Victorian farmhouse bordering a graveyard felt less like a warning and more like a personal invitation. The house itself was a sagging monstrosity of peeling white clapboard, black shutters hanging crooked like broken teeth, and a wraparound porch whose floorboards groaned underfoot as if in pain. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew, old wood rot, and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers left too long in a sealed jar. There was no electricity, but Ed had rigged a car battery to a couple of LED lanterns in the kitchen and bedroom. Running water came from a hand pump in the yard, its iron handle slick with rust. My room was on the second floor, directly above the parlor, with a single window that faced east, away from the cemetery, Ed had assured me. But the truth is, I could feel it. Even before I saw it, I knew where Blackthorn lay. A quiet pressure in my chest, a faint hum in my ears at night, like distant chanting just below the threshold of hearing. I moved in on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I'd settled into a rhythm. Right during the day, explore the property at dusk. Sleep, with the lantern dimmed and the door latched, though the lock was broken and the latch clicked hollowly. More suggestion than barrier. The first odd thing happened on Friday. I was walking the property line near the back fence, which sagged and leaned inward where the posts had rotted, when I saw it. The cemetery, not from the front gate, which was chained and padlocked with a rusted sign that read Blackthorn Memorial. Est. 1842. Private property, no trespassing, but from a gap in the trees where the fence had collapsed entirely. A narrow footpath, overgrown with nettles and wild thyme, led straight through the underbrush and opened onto a sea of tilted headstones, obelisks, and crumbling mausoleums shrouded in ivy. It wasn't large, maybe 3 acres, but it felt dense, like time had pooled there and thickened. The air changed the moment I stepped past the tree line, cooler, heavier, still no birds, no insects, just silence, so complete it pressed against my eardrums. I didn't go in, not yet. I just stood at the edge, hands in my pockets, staring. Most of the stones were slate or granite, worn smooth by rain and decades of neglect. Names had faded, dates blurred into illegible smudges, but some, especially the newer ones, mid-20th century, were still clear. One caught my eye, a small marble marker, unadorned except for a single inscription carved in neat, precise script. Eleanor Voss, beloved sister, 1919, 1937. She listened too closely. I frowned. She listened too closely. An odd epitaph, poetic, unsettling. I crouched, brushing away moss with my thumb. The stone was cold, even through my glove. And then, without thinking, just a reflex, the way you might test a word on your tongue, I whispered it. Eleanor Voss. The air didn't move, but something shifted. A pressure behind my eyes, sudden and sharp, like a migraine spike. I blinked, stood quickly, looked around. Nothing. Just the stones, the trees, the slanting afternoon light casting long skeletal shadows across the ground. I walked back to the house, uneasy but dismissive. Coincidence? Stress? Low blood sugar? I made tea on the propane camp stove, wrote 2 pages of my novel, and went to bed by 9. That night, I woke at 2:17 a.m., not to an alarm, not to noise, to stillness, the kind that feels like a held breath. The lantern had dimmed to a faint amber glow. Moonlight bled through the thin curtains, striping the floorboards in pale light. And there, at the foot of my bed, a shape, not a person, not quite. A silhouette, indistinct at first, like smoke given weight. Taller than a man, but thin, too thin, its shoulders hunched forward as if bearing an invisible burden. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood, watching. I didn't scream, couldn't. My throat had sealed shut. My limbs were lead. Only my eyes worked, darting from the shape to the door to the window, back to the shape. Then it tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion, too smooth, too jointless. And in that moment, I heard it, not with my ears, but inside my skull, like a voice rising from the base of my spine. You called. I squeezed my eyes shut. Not real, not real. Sleep paralysis. Hypnagogic hallucination. I'd read about it. Common in isolated environments, stress-induced. I counted backward from 100, forcing my breath steady. When I opened my eyes, the shape was gone. The lantern flickered once, then stabilized. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I walked back to the cemetery. I told myself I needed to understand. That rational inquiry dispelled fear, that I owed it to my craft, to horror writing, to investigate the source of the unease. But the truth? I was drawn, like iron to a magnet, like a tongue to a cracked tooth. This time, I went in. The path through the graves was uneven, sunken in places where coffins had collapsed beneath the soil. Weeds choked the alleys between family plots. Many stones were cracked, some split clean in two by roots or frost heave. Others leaned at drunken angles as if trying to flee. I moved slowly, deliberately, scanning inscriptions. Jonathan H. Pike, 1883 to 1901. Rest in peace. Martha and Thomas Bellwether, together beyond the veil. Infant son of A. and E. Crow, 1899. Nothing unusual, just the usual melancholy of forgotten lives. Then I saw it again. Eleanor Voss's marker. It hadn't moved, but the moss I'd brushed away the day before was back, thick, velvety green, as if it had regrown overnight, and beside it a fresh patch of disturbed earth. Not a grave, too small, too shallow, just a depression, maybe 6 inches deep and a foot wide, filled with dark, damp soil. No footprints, no tool marks, just an indentation, as though something had pressed itself into the ground and then risen. I knelt, touched the soil, cold, wet, and beneath the scent of loam, something else, metallic, like old pennies, like copper left in vinegar. "You're back." I jerked upright. An old man stood 10 feet away, leaning on a gnarled hickory cane. He wore faded overalls over a flannel shirt, a battered tweed cap pulled low over wire-rimmed glasses. His face was a road map of wrinkles, his eyes pale blue and unnervingly sharp. "The caretaker," I said, rising slowly. "Clarence," he said. His voice was dry, rasping like pages turning in a long locked book. "I tend Blackthorn, 43 years, come all saints." He didn't offer a hand, didn't smile, just stared at me with the weary patience of a man who'd seen too many fools make the same mistake. "I'm just looking," I said, gesturing vaguely. "Writing a book, local history." He grunted. "History's buried here, best left buried." His gaze flicked to Eleanor Stone. "You read her name." It wasn't a question. I just said it, once, out loud. Clarence's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, his boot sinking slightly into the soft earth. "Names have weight, son, especially here, especially hers." "Why? What's so special about—" "Don't," he cut in, sharp as a whip. "Don't say it again. Don't even think it too loudly." He looked around, as if expecting the trees themselves to lean in and listen. "Blackthorn ain't like other places. Ground's thin here, veils worn, and some of the dead, they don't rest. They listen. They wait for voices, for names, for invitation." I almost laughed. Almost. But the raw conviction in his voice, the way his knuckles whitened on the cane, stopped me. "Eleanor Voss," I said quieter this time. Testing. Clarence flinched as if struck. His breath hitched. "God damn it." He raised a trembling hand to his temple. "You've done it now." "Done what?" "She's awake." He turned and walked away, cane tapping unevenly on the flagstone path, without another word. I watched him until he disappeared behind a mausoleum draped in ivy, its iron door hanging open like a slack jaw. I left quickly, but not before I noticed something new on Eleanor Stone. The epitaph had changed. Where it once read, "She listened too closely," the letters had shifted, subtly, imperceptibly to the untrained eye. But I saw it. The L in listened was now a C. The second O in closely was deeper, darker. It now read, "She called too closely." That night, the knocking started, not on the door, on the window. 3 soft taps, pause. 3 more, like someone testing the glass, politely asking to be let in. I lay rigid in bed, blanket pulled to my chin, staring at the window. The curtains were drawn, but moonlight still seeped through the thin fabric, casting the room into shades of gray and silver. The knocking came again. Tap, 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 tap. Steady, patient. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then a whisper, faint, sibilant, barely audible, over the blood roaring in my ears. "Let me in." Not Eleanor's voice, not any voice I recognized. It was layered, multiple tones overlapping like a chorus of dry leaves skittering across stone. Feminine, but fractured, young, but ancient. I squeezed my eyes shut. Go away. Silence for 10 seconds, 20, then scritch. A fingernail, long, sharp, dragging slowly down the glass. I bolted upright, fumbling for the lantern switch. Light flooded the room. The window was empty. But on the sill, just beneath the latch, 3 parallel scratches marred the paint. Deep, fresh, and smeared with something dark and viscous that caught the light like wet ink. I spent the next day in town buying supplies I didn't need, bottled water, canned soup, extra batteries, just to be away from the house. I avoided the cemetery lane, avoided looking toward the trees. But as I drove back down the dirt road at dusk, headlights cutting through the violet gloom, I saw him, Clarence, standing in the middle of the road, cane planted firmly, face grim. I slowed to a stop. He approached the passenger window, his breath fogging the glass. He didn't speak until I rolled it down. "You hear her yet?" he asked. I swallowed. "Last night. At the window." He nodded, as if confirming a diagnosis. "She's close, getting stronger." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a thread. "You've got one chance. Tonight, midnight. Go to her stone, dig where the earth is soft. Bury something of yours, hair, a fingernail, a drop of blood, without speaking her name. Then walk backward out of the cemetery. Don't look back. Don't stop. If you do it right, she might let you go. And if I don't?" His eyes held mine. "Then she'll keep calling and calling and calling until you answer." I didn't dig that night. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not the blood, not the hair, not the silent ritual. It felt like surrender, like admitting the rules were real. Instead, I barred the bedroom door with a chair, taped the window shut, lit 3 lanterns, sat on the bed with my back against the wall, a hunting knife from the kitchen drawer gripped in my sweating palm. Midnight passed. 12:30, 1 hours, silence. Maybe Clarence was wrong. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe thump from the attic. A heavy, wet sound like a sack of meat dropped onto floorboards. Then footsteps, slow, dragging, coming down the stairs. Thump, drag, thump, drag. Stopping outside my door. The doorknob turned. It shouldn't have. The chair was braced hard against it, but the knob rotated anyway, smoothly, deliberately, until it clicked against the latch. A pause. Then a voice so close it felt like lips brushing my ear. "You called me, James?" I hadn't told anyone my name. Not Ed, not Clarence, only my driver's license, and that was in my wallet on the dresser. "Open the door," the voice murmured. "I just want to thank you." I pressed myself into the corner, knife raised, breath ragged. The chair screeched, not from force, from inside the room. It slid backward, inch by inch, as if pulled by invisible hands, until a door swung open with a soft creak. She stood there, Eleanor, not a ghost, not smoke, a body, tall, gaunt, dressed in a tattered white nightgown, yellowed with age, the hem dark with soil. Her hair was long, black, matted with roots and grave mold. Her skin was the color of old parchment, gray stretched tight over sharp bones, but her eyes were wide, dark, wet, and fixed on me with terrifying focus. Her lips parted. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she stepped inside. The door swung shut behind her. No wind, no draft, just closure. I raised the knife. She didn't flinch. "You don't need that," she said, tilting her head, the same motion as the shape in my room. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to stay." She took another step. The lanterns dimmed, not flickered, dimmed, as if the light itself were being absorbed by her presence. "I've been so lonely," she continued, her voice weaving between sorrow and hunger. "No one visits, no one speaks. The others, they sleep, but I listen, I wait. And when I heard you, your voice, so warm, so alive, I knew you'd understand." "I don't understand anything," I choked out. "You will." She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "You'll learn to listen, too." She raised a hand, long fingers ending in blackened nails, and reached for my face. I slashed with the knife. It passed through her wrist like smoke. No resistance, no blood. But she flinched. A ripple went through her form like water disturbed. For a split second, her face changed. Mouth stretching too wide, eyes blackening fully, skin cracking like dried clay, and from her throat came a sound, a chorus of screams, layered, overlapping, coming from a dozen throats at once. Then she was still again, sad. "You hurt me," she whispered, and the lanterns went out. Darkness, cold, not the chill of night, but the deep, marrow-freezing cold of earth, 3 feet down. I scrambled backward on the bed, hitting the wall. She was on me before I could scream. Her hands, solid now, icy and strong, gripped my wrists. Her breath smelled of damp soil and iron. Her weight pressed me down, not heavy, but inescapable, like the crush of deep water. "Shh," she breathed into my ear. "Don't fight. It's easier if you don't fight." I thrashed, kicked, twisted, useless. Her mouth opened, not to bite, but to speak. And she began to recite, not words, names, dozens, hundreds, a torrent of them whispered rapidly, urgently, each one punctuated by a shudder in her frame. Abigail Crane, Silas Morrow, Lillian Pike, Jeremiah Crow, Thomas Bellwether, Martha Bellwether, Eleanor Voss. She paused. Her eyes met mine. James Alden. My name, spoken in that same layered choral voice, and something shifted inside me. A door opened, not in the room, in my head. A flood of sound rushed in, whispers, weeping, laughter, chanting, sobbing, all converging, all calling, all hungry. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The noise wasn't external. It was inside, vibrating in my teeth, my bones, my blood. She leaned closer. "Now you hear them too," she whispered. "Now you're one of us." Her mouth pressed against my temple, not a kiss, a seal, and the world went silent, not peaceful. Waiting. I don't know how long I lay there. When I opened my eyes, she was gone. The room was empty. The lanterns were on again, burning steady. The door was closed. The chair was back in place. No scratches on the window, no soil on the sill. I sat up. My hands trembled. I reached for the water bottle on the nightstand. Stopped. My reflection in the glass wasn't mine. For just a second, just a flicker, the face staring back was hers. Pale, hungry, smiling. I dropped the bottle. It rolled under the bed. I didn't pick it up. I spent the next 3 days in the house. not sleeping, barely eating, jumping at every creak, every sigh of wind. But nothing happened. No knocks, no whispers, no shapes in the corner. Maybe it was over. Maybe she'd taken what she wanted and left. On the fourth night, I dreamed, not a nightmare, a memory, not mine, hers. I stood in a small white-walled room, 1930s wallpaper peeling at the seams, a narrow bed, a porcelain basin on a stand. A girl, 16 or 17, sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. Eleanor. She was listening, not to music, not to voices, to the silence between heartbeats, to the hum of the earth, to the voices in the walls. Her mother called from downstairs. "Eleanor, supper's ready." She didn't answer. She couldn't, because she'd heard it. The name, spoken by a neighbor at the fence, just loud enough to carry on the wind. Martha Bellwether passed last night, buried at Blackthorn at dawn. And Eleanor had whispered it back just once. Martha Bellwether. That night, Martha came to her window, not angry, grateful. "You heard me," she'd said, and she'd taken Eleanor's hand and led her into the dark. The dream ended with Eleanor standing at her own grave, freshly dug, watching her family lower the casket, empty, into the ground. She wasn't inside it. She was standing beside it, smiling, free. I woke at 3:33 a.m. The house was quiet, too quiet, no wind, no owls, no crickets, just listening. I got up, walked to the window, drew back the curtain. The cemetery lay bathed in moonlight, and every single headstone, hundreds of them, was turned to face my house. Not tilted, rotated, as if someone had walked among them in the night and turned each one, carefully, deliberately, so their inscriptions faced east, toward me, toward my window, toward my name. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just stood there, hands pressed to the cold glass, and realized the truth. Clarence was wrong. It wasn't about burying something of mine. It was about giving something, my voice, my attention, my name. And I'd already given it. I hear them all now. Not just Eleanor, all of them, Abigail, Silas, Lillian, Jeremiah. They whisper at dusk. They hum in the walls. They wait for me to speak, to acknowledge, so they can step through. Last night, I found a new marker at the edge of the cemetery, freshly placed, granite, polished, no dates, just 2 lines. James Alden. He listened too closely. I haven't touched it, haven't read it aloud, but sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when the house holds its breath and the lanterns dim on their own, I catch myself moving my lips, forming the words, and I wonder, when I finally say them out loud, will I join them? Or will they finally come here to stay? And with that, this story comes to an end. Let's move on to the next one. I woke up to 47 missed calls, all from my future self. The first thing I noticed wasn't the number of calls, it was the silence. Usually my apartment complex is a symphony of urban decay. I live on the 4th floor of a brick walk-up in Chicago. By 8 a.m. on a Saturday, I should hear Mrs. Giamatti's beagle yapping 3 doors down. I should hear the rumble of the L train vibrating the steel fire escape outside my window. I should hear the heavy bass of the teenager's stereo in 4B. But there was nothing, just a heavy, suffocating silence that felt like cotton wool stuffed into my ears. I rolled over, my head pounding. I'd taken 2 melatonin gummies the night before. A mistake. They always gave me vivid, sticky nightmares, and I felt like I was swimming through molasses to surface into consciousness. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen was blindingly bright in the dim room. I squinted, trying to focus. 47. Missed calls. My stomach gave a weird lurch. 47? Who calls someone 47 times? An emergency. Mom, Dad, an accident. I unlocked the screen, my thumb hovering over the Recents tab. I expected to see Mom or maybe my boss if the building had burned down. I stared at the list. The blood drained out of my face so fast I felt dizzy. Missed call, me, mobile. Missed call, me, mobile. Missed call, me, mobile. The list scrolled down, screen after screen. All 47 calls were from my own contact number. I sat up, the sheets pooling around my waist. The room was cold, unnaturally cold for September. I checked the timestamps. The first call had come in at 3:12 a.m. The last one was at 7:59 a.m. 1 minute ago. I held the phone like it was a live grenade. A glitch. It had to be a glitch. Maybe the cell towers were messed up. Maybe someone was spoofing my number. That happens, right? Scammers use your own number to bypass spam filters, but 47 times. Then I saw the voicemail icon. One new voicemail. Only one? If they called 47 times, why leave only one message? I pressed the speakerphone button. I didn't want to hold the plastic against my ear. The robotic female voice announced, "Message received today at 7:59 a.m. A burst of static. Then a voice. "Don't. Static. Don't open the blinds. David, listen to me. Do not look outside. Do not leave the bedroom. They are..." Heavy breathing. "They are tracking the movement of your eyes. Lock the door, now." The message clicked off. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed. The voice wasn't a scammer. It wasn't a generated AI voice. It was me. It was my voice. But it sounded wrong. It was rougher, hoarse, like I had been screaming for hours. And there was a tremor in it, a hysterical edge that I had never heard in myself, not even when I broke my leg skiing, not even when my dad died. It was the sound of raw, unadulterated terror. "They are tracking the movement of your eyes." My gaze instantly darted to the window. The blinds were drawn, thank God, but there was a gap, a tiny vertical sliver of light where the slats didn't quite meet. I felt a primal urge to look, to peek, to prove that this was insane. Buzz up. The phone vibrated in my hand, startling a yelp out of me. "Incoming call, me, mobile." I stared at the screen. My own face, a goofus selfie I used for my contact card, grinned back at me. I answered. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "You listened to the voicemail," the voice on the other end said. It was definitely me, but the audio quality was crystal clear. No static. It sounded like I was standing right next to myself. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to sound tough but failing miserably. "Is this some kind of deep fake prank? Because it's not funny." "It's not a prank, David. It's 10:15 a.m. I'm you, or I was you. Look, we don't have time for the sci-fi explanation. You have about 30 seconds before the first one gets to the door." "The first what? Who?" "The sweepers," the voice said. "Listen to me carefully. Get up. Go to the hallway door. Lock the deadbolt, the chain, and the bottom latch. Do it now." "Why?" "Because at 8:05 a.m., Mrs. Giamatti walked out to walk her dog, and they took her. They took everyone, David. The building is empty. You're the last one left because you sleep like the dead." I looked at the clock. 8:03 a.m. "You said it's 10:15 where you are?" "Yes. I'm calling you from 2 hours in the future. I'm trying to keep us alive. I failed the first time I opened the door. Please, lock it." The desperation in the voice was nauseating. It was the sound of a man begging for his life. I stood up. I didn't believe it, not really, but the fear was contagious. I walked out of the bedroom, down the short hallway to the front door of my apartment. I stared at the locks. The deadbolt was already turned. I always locked it. "The chain," the voice on the phone whispered, "and the bottom latch, the one you never use." I hesitated. Thump! A sound from the hallway outside. It wasn't a knock. It sounded like a wet sandbag being thrown against the wood. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Lock it!" I screamed at myself through the phone. I fumbled with the chain, sliding it into the groove. I kicked the bottom latch into place. The doorknob turned. It turned slowly, grinding the mechanism. Then a force slammed against the door. The wood groaned. The frame shuddered. If I hadn't done the chain and the latch, the deadbolt might have held, but the door would have bowed enough for what? "Open up, David." The voice from the other side of the door wasn't mine. It was Mrs. Giamatti's, but it was flat, monotone. "David, it is time for the walk. The dog needs to walk. Open the door." I backed away, clutching the phone. "Mrs. Giamatti?" "Don't answer her," my future self hissed in my ear. "That's not her, not anymore. Go back to the bedroom, quietly." I retreated, stepping softly on the hardwood. I went back into the bedroom and shut the door. "What is happening?" I whispered into the phone. "Is this an invasion? Zombies?" "Not zombies," future me said. "They're listeners. They mimic. They take the shape of the people they touch, but they need permission to enter. They need you to open the barrier. If you open the door or the window, they get in. Once they're in, they assimilate you." "Assimilate?" "It hurts, David. God, it hurts. I can still feel it happening to me right now. That's why I'm calling. If I save you, maybe I save myself. The logic is fuzzy. My memory is going, okay, what do I do? Call the police?" "No. The police came at 8:45. They're part of it now. You'll hear the siren soon. Don't look out the window." I looked at the blinds again. The urge to look was overwhelming. It was like a magnet pulling at my eyeballs. "Why 47 calls?" I asked. "Why didn't you leave a message earlier?" I tried. Future me sounded exhausted. "The signal. It's hard to reach back. The connection keeps dropping. And every time I call, I lose a little more of myself. I think this is the last time I can get through." "Okay. So what's the plan? How do I get out?" "You don't get out. Not yet. You have to wait for the shift." "The shift?" "At 11 a.m., the sunlight hits the fire escape at a specific angle. They hate direct UV. They retreat into the shadows of the hallway. That's your window. You have to go out the fire escape, climb up to the roof, and jump to the next building. The gap is 6 feet. You can make it." "I can't jump 6 feet." "You can when something with Mrs. Giamatti's face and a mouth full of needles is chasing you. You make the jump. I made the jump." "Wait," I paused. "If you made the jump, then why are you calling me? If you survived, why do you sound like you're dying?" Silence on the line. Then a heavy sigh. "I made the jump to the roof, but I didn't check the roof access door. It was open. One of them was waiting inside the stairwell. I got bit, David. I've been hiding in the utility closet on the roof for 2 hours, bleeding out, watching my skin turn gray. I'm calling you to tell you to check the door. Check the damn door before you run past it." My blood ran cold. "Okay, check the door. Got it." "I'm fading," the voice said. "The signal is breaking up. Stay inside. Don't make a sound. Wait for 11 hour. And David?" "Yeah? I'm sorry." The line went dead. I sat there in the silence. 8:10 a.m. I had nearly 3 hours to wait. The next 2 hours were an exercise in psychological torture. At 8:30, the scratching started. It sounded like fingernails being dragged down the hallway drywall. Long, slow strokes. At 8:45, just like the voice predicted, the sirens came. But they didn't wail. They chirped, short and aggressive, then cut off abruptly right outside the building. I heard heavy boots on the stairs. I heard shouting, "Police! Is anyone in there?" It sounded like Officer Miller, a guy I'd seen around the neighborhood. "Open up! We have reports of a gas leak." A lie. Future me said they need permission. They need me to open the barrier. "I know you're in there, David." The voice changed. It shifted from Officer Miller's baritone to my mother's voice. "David, honey, please open the door. I'm scared." I clapped my hands over my ears. I sat in the corner of the room, curled into a ball, rocking back and forth. It's a mimic. It's a mimic. It's a mimic. At 9:30, the power went out. The hum of the refrigerator died. The room plunged into gloom. The silence returned, heavier than before. I stared at the phone. 48% battery. I scrolled through the missed calls again. 47 calls. It seemed so desperate. I tapped on the voicemail again. I needed to hear it one more time to make sure I hadn't hallucinated it. Message received today at 7:59 a.m. Don't open the blinds. I listened to the cadence of the voice, the terror. It was real. 10:55 a.m. I stood up. My legs were stiff. I went to the window. I peeked through the tiniest crack in the blinds. The sun was shining. It was a bright, beautiful day. The fire escape steel was gleaming. I grabbed my sneakers and tied them tight. I grabbed a kitchen knife. Useless, probably, but it made me feel better. 10:58 a.m. I moved to the window. I unlocked the sash. 11 a.m. I took a deep breath. "Check the roof access door," I whispered to myself. I threw the window up. The noise of the city rushed in, but it was wrong. No cars, no people, just wind. I scrambled out onto the fire escape. The metal was hot under my hands. I looked down into the alley. It was filled with them. They were standing in the shadows of the dumpsters, looking up. They looked like people, neighbors, the mailman, the barista from the corner shop, but their limbs were elongated, their jaws hanging slackly open. They saw me. A collective hiss rose up from the alley like steam escaping a vent. I didn't look back. I climbed. I scrambled up the rusting ladder, my breath tearing at my throat. 4th floor, 5th floor, roof. I pulled myself over the parapet and rolled onto the gravel surface of the roof. The sun was beating down. It was clear. I stood up and scanned the roof. There was the utility closet my future self had mentioned, and there was the roof access door for the next building over. I ran toward the edge. The gap between the buildings was about 6 feet, a terrifying distance, but doable. I backed up to get a running start. Then I saw it, the utility closet door. It was slightly ajar. I stopped. Future me said he was hiding in there. He said he was bleeding out. If he was in there, could I help him? Could I help me? I took a step toward the closet. "David." The voice came from inside the dark gap of the closet door. It was weak, wet. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm here." "Don't come closer," the voice rasped. I'm changing. I can feel my teeth moving. "I can get you help. We can jump together." "No, I can't move. Listen, did you check the door?" "What door?" "The roof access door on the other building." I looked across the gap. The door on the other roof was closed. "It's closed," I said. "Good." The voice in the closet groaned. "Good. Then you have a chance." I looked at the closet. I felt a surge of insane empathy. That was me in there, dying. "I can't leave you," I said. "You have to go." I turned and ran. I hit the edge of the roof and launched myself into the air. For a second, I was flying. Then gravity grabbed me. My feet hit the gravel on the other side. I tumbled, scraping my elbows, but I was alive. I was on the other building. I scrambled up and looked back. The door to the utility closet on my building swung open. A figure stepped out. It was me. But it wasn't injured. It wasn't bleeding. It was wearing my clothes, but they were crisp and clean. It stood on the edge of the roof, looking at me. It smiled, and as it smiled, its jaw unhinged, dropping down to its chest. It raised a phone to its ear. My phone rang in my pocket. I stared at the figure across the gap. I pulled my phone out. Incoming call. Me. Mobile. I answered it, staring directly at the monster that wore my face. "Hello?" I whispered. The monster on the roof didn't move its mouth, but the voice came through the phone, perfectly clear. "You made the jump," it said. The voice wasn't raspy anymore. It was smooth, predatory. "You lied," I said. "You weren't dying." "I lied about a lot of things," the voice purred. "I told you to wait for 11 a.m. Do you know why?" I looked around. The sun was high. Because at 11 a.m., the shadows on the west side of the building stretched just enough to cover the roof access door you're standing next to. I froze. I spun around. The door to the stairwell of the building I was currently standing on, the one I had just jumped to, was in the shadow of a water tower. And it was open. Standing in the doorway, shrouded in darkness, were 3 of them. They were all wearing police uniforms. "I didn't want you to jump to save you, David," my voice on the phone said. "I wanted you to jump because my building was fully harvested. We needed fresh meat, and you just delivered yourself to the colony next door." I dropped the phone. The figures in the doorway stepped out. I backed up, but there was nowhere to go. Just the 6-foot gap and the monster waiting on the other side. The last thing I heard before they grabbed me was the sound of my own voice, echoing from the phone lying on the gravel. 48 missed calls, it laughed. "Maybe next time, pick up sooner." With that, the story is over. Let's move to the next story. The first time I noticed the lag, I dismissed it as a trick of the light. My apartment is an old one, a pre-war cavern with floors that sigh and windows that rattle out a mournful off-key tune when the wind blows in from the river. The mirror in my bathroom is as old as the building itself, a heavy, beveled-edge rectangle with a fine, spidery tracery of desilvering around the edges like a slow, creeping frost. I've always been fond of its imperfections. It gives my reflection a kind of melancholic antique quality, a tintype ghost of my own tired 30-something face. My name is Leo. I'm a professional translator, a man who spends his days in the quiet, meticulous, and sometimes maddeningly precise world of semantics. I work from home, a life of monastic, self-imposed solitude. The mirror is often my only real point of face-to-face contact for days on end. The lag. It was a Tuesday morning. I was brushing my teeth, my movements a familiar, half-conscious ballet of foam and bristles. I moved the brush from the left side of my mouth to the right. And my reflection, it was late. By a fraction of a second, a delay so infinitesimal that if I hadn't been staring directly at it, I would have missed it entirely. My hand was already on the right side of my mouth, but in the mirror it was still on the left. Then, like a lagging video call trying to catch up, the reflection's arm snapped into place, perfectly mimicking my own. I spat into the sink, my heart giving a sudden, curious thump. I leaned closer to the glass, my breath fogging a small oval patch. I raised my right hand. The reflection raised its right hand. I wiggled my fingers. It wiggled its fingers. It was perfect, a perfect, synchronous, and utterly reliable law of physics. I shook my head, a small self-deprecating laugh escaping my lips. I was tired. My eyes were playing tricks on me. I had been translating a particularly dense and deeply tedious German philosophical text for 12 hours straight. My brain was clearly misfiring, but the next morning it happened again. This time I was combing my hair. I lifted the comb to my head, and the reflection was a beat behind. A tiny, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present delay. It was like watching a movie where the sound was a few frames out of sync with the picture. The dissonance was subtle, but deeply, profoundly unnerving. My rational mind, the part of me that translates legal documents and abhors ambiguity, immediately began to construct a list of logical explanations. It was a neurological issue, a mild, undiagnosed form of visual processing disorder, a side effect of my chronic, low-level caffeine addiction. I made an appointment with an optometrist. I cut back on coffee, but the lag continued, and it began to get worse. The fraction of a second became a full second, then two. I would turn my head, and my reflection would hold its position for a long, pregnant, and deeply unsettling moment before it, too, would turn, its movement a little too smooth, a little too fluid, as if to make up for its tardiness. My morning routine became a ritual of slow-motion, paranoid dread. I would stand before the mirror, my heart pounding, performing a series of simple, deliberate movements, a terrified conductor trying to lead an orchestra that was perpetually and deliberately out of time. I began to notice other changes. The reflection was no longer just late. It was different. The dark, tired circles under my eyes, a permanent fixture of my own face, were fainter on the reflection. The small, worried frown line between my eyebrows was absent. The reflection looked better, more rested, more confident. It was me, but it was a version of me that had been getting a full, uninterrupted 8 hours of sleep. I stopped using the bathroom mirror. I started shaving in the kitchen sink, using a small, cheap plastic travel mirror that I propped up on the counter, but I couldn't avoid all reflective surfaces. The darkened screen of my computer monitor, the window of a passing bus, the polished chrome of the elevator doors in my building, in every surface, in every fleeting, distorted glimpse of myself, I could see it. The lag, the subtle and growing dissonance between my own real-time movements and the delayed and slightly improved version of me that was looking back. I had to understand. I was a man who believed in research, in evidence. I set up a camera. I mounted my high-speed digital camera on a tripod in the bathroom, aimed directly at the mirror. I stood before it, and I performed my strange, new, and terrifying daily ballet. I raised my arms. I turned my head. I smiled, a pained, forced, and deeply unnatural grimace. I loaded the footage onto my computer and slowed it down, frame by agonizing frame. The evidence was undeniable. It was not a trick of my own fallible and increasingly terrified perception. It was real. Frame 1. My arm begins to rise. The reflection remains still. Frame 2. My arm is halfway up. The reflection's arm begins its ascent. The lag was consistently and quantifiably 24 frames. A single, solid, and scientifically proven second of impossible, reality-bending delay. And then I saw something else, something that made the blood in my veins turn to a slush of pure icy terror. As I was lowering my arm for a single, solitary frame, just before the reflection began its own delayed descent, it smiled. My own face in the foreground of the shot was a mask of tense, worried concentration. But the face in the mirror, for 1/24th of a second, was wearing a slow, easy, and deeply, deeply malevolent grin. My apartment, my quiet, solitary, and safe little world, was no longer my own. It was a shared space. I was living with a roommate who lived on the other side of the glass, a roommate who was becoming more and more confident, more and more independent with every passing day. My research became an obsession. I dove into the dark, strange, and esoteric corners of physics and philosophy. I read about quantum entanglement, about parallel universes, about the holographic principle. I was a man drowning in a sea of theories, looking for a single, solid piece of driftwood to cling to. I found a strange and deeply unsettling paper by an obscure and largely discredited physicist from the 1970s named Dr. Eris Thorne. He had postulated a theory he called psychic inertia. He believed that a strong, focused consciousness could, over time, leave a kind of energetic residue on its immediate and most frequently observed environment. He believed that mirrors, especially old mercury-backed ones, were particularly susceptible to this phenomenon. He theorized that a mirror in a person's home over the course of decades did not just reflect a person's image, it absorbed a faint, echoic, and cumulative impression of their identity. He believed that, under certain rare and deeply traumatic circumstances, this stored psychic energy could cohere. It could gain a kind of momentum, a kind of life of its own. The reflection is not a ghost, he wrote. It is a habit. It is the accumulated and deeply ingrained memory of the person it has been reflecting for a lifetime. And if the original should undergo a sudden and profound psychological or emotional shift, a deep grief, a debilitating depression, the reflection, the habit, may be stronger than the original. It may, in a very real sense, refuse to change. It may choose to continue being the person it has always been, the person it remembers rather than the broken, altered version of the person it is now seeing. The words on the page were a cold, hard, and perfectly fitting key to the lock of my own private madness. My life had been one of deep and profound and deeply ingrained routine. And then 6 months ago, my mother had died. It had not been a sudden, tragic death, but a slow, cruel, and deeply undignified wasting away from a cancer that had consumed her, and in the process had consumed my own quiet and carefully ordered life. I had been her primary caregiver for the last terrible year, and her death had not been a release. It had been an amputation. The grief had hollowed me out, had replaced the quiet, thoughtful, and sometimes even happy man I had once been with this new, gray, and perpetually tired ghost. My reflection had not changed with me. It was still him, the old Leo, the better Leo, and it was, it seemed, fighting to reassert itself. The lag was no longer just a delay. It was a period of silent and deeply unsettling rebellion. I would walk away from the mirror, and my reflection would stay for a full 10 seconds, its head tilted, its expression a mixture of pity and contempt, before it would turn and walk, not out of frame, but deeper into the strange, silvered and two-dimensional world of its own. The physical phenomena began. The temperature in the bathroom dropped. A cold, palpable, and deeply unnatural chill seemed to emanate from the glass itself. I would hear a soft, whispering sound at night, a sound that was not quite my own voice, but a clearer, more confident, and more articulate version of it. It would be speaking in French or in German, the languages I translated, but it would be speaking them with a fluency, a poetry, that I, in my own waking and deeply insecure life, had never been able to achieve. He was not just a reflection anymore. He was a presence, and he was growing stronger, more defined, while I, in the real world, felt like I was fading, becoming more and more like a faint and poorly rendered copy of him. I knew I had to get rid of it, the mirror. I had to smash it. I had to break the connection. But I was afraid. My own superstitious and deeply irrational mind was filled with the old childish fears. 7 years of bad luck. But it was more than that. I was afraid that if I broke the mirror, I would not be destroying him, but releasing him, or that I would be destroying the last, remaining, and better part of myself. The night he finally spoke to me, the voice was not in the room. It was in my head, a clear, calm, and deeply rational thought that was not my own. I was standing before the mirror, the nightly morbid ritual now an ingrained and deeply masochistic habit. He was there, his image clear and steady, the lag now a full and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and terrifyingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically and, I'm sorry, the words, they are difficult. He was there. The lag was a full 30 seconds, a half a minute of my own personal and deeply real time that he now possessed. He was looking at me, his expression calm and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically and, "It doesn't have to be this way, Leo," the thought whispered in the quiet, empty, and suddenly crowded space of my own mind. "You are so tired. You are so sad. Let me help you." "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice a dry rattling and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically and, "I am you," the thought replied. "The you that you were meant to be. The you that existed before the world broke you. I am the blueprint. You are the flawed and fading copy. But we can be whole again. We can merge. I can fix you." He raised his hand and pressed it to the surface of the glass, and I felt a cold, tingling sensation on my own chest, as if his fingers were reaching through the glass, through the air, and into my very soul. I stumbled back, a raw, ragged, and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically, and I stumbled back. The connection broke. The feeling was gone. He was not trying to help me. He was trying to replace me. He was a psychic vampire, a ghost of my own, former self, and he was trying to reclaim his old life, his old body. I knew then that I had to fight. I had to do what I should have done weeks ago. I went to the garage. I found a hammer, a heavy steel, and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically, and it was a hammer. I walked back to the bathroom. He was there in the mirror waiting for me, and he was smiling. He knew what I was about to do, and he was not afraid. "You can't destroy me without destroying yourself," he thought, his voice a calm and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically and It was a confident voice. I am your past. I am your strength. I am all the good and strong and unbroken parts of you. You are nothing without me. I looked at him, at the better me, the me who had not spent a year watching his mother die, the me who had not inherited her deep and profound and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically and her sadness. And I understood. He was right. He was all the parts of me that had not been touched by the grief, by the pain, by the messy and beautiful and heartbreaking and real and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically and the real parts of life. He was not the better me. He was the lesser me. He was the me that had never truly lived. You are not my strength, I said, my own voice, for the first time in a year, clear and steady and strong. You are my anchor. You are the ghost of a man I am no longer, and I am letting you go. I raised the hammer. He did not flinch. He just smiled, a sad and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically, and it was a pitying smile. And I did not bring the hammer down on the mirror. I turned, and I brought the hammer down with all the strength and all the grief and all the pain and all the rage and all the love I possessed on my own, real and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically, and I smashed the sink. The porcelain exploded in a shower of white, sharp, and beautifully and wonderfully and finally, blessedly real fragments. The reflection watched, his smile faltering, a flicker of confusion in his perfect, rested, and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically, and his eyes. I was not playing his game. I was not trying to destroy him. I was destroying his world, the perfect, pristine, and untouched bathroom he inhabited. I brought the hammer down on the tiled floor, the tiles cracking and splintering. I smashed the light fixture. I shattered the medicine cabinet. I was a whirlwind of creative and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically and a destructive force. I was a man not just accepting his own broken and messy reality, but embracing it. I was making my world as broken and as real and as beautifully and wonderfully and finally, blessedly, imperfect as I was. He screamed, a silent and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically, and it was a psychic scream of pure, unadulterated and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically, and rage, his world, his perfect and pristine and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically, and his world was now a reflection of my own, chaotic and beautiful and wonderful and finally, blessedly real and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically, and it was a mess. The lag began to disappear. The dissonance was gone. Our worlds were once again in sync, a perfect and shattered and beautifully and wonderfully and finally, blessedly, real and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically, and they were the same. He was no longer stronger. We were equals, two broken men in two broken rooms. And then I did the final and most difficult thing. I looked at him, at my own, sad and tired and broken and beautiful and wonderful, and finally blessedly real and deeply and profoundly and unsettlingly and strangely and beautifully and tragically and comically, and I looked at myself, and I forgave him. I forgave myself. I forgave myself for the grief. I forgave myself for the sadness. I forgave myself for not being the perfect and strong and unbroken man that he was. And in that act of forgiveness, he faded. He was not destroyed. He was reabsorbed. The echo was reconciled with the source. The habit was broken. The two separate and warring parts of me were once again whole. The mirror was just a mirror again. My reflection was just my reflection. The lag was gone. I live in a broken bathroom now. I have not fixed it. It is a monument, not to my grief, but to my victory. It is a reminder that the most beautiful things in the world are not the perfect and pristine and untouched ones. They are the ones that have been broken and have been put back together. They are the ones that have the scars to prove that they have survived. They are the ones that are finally and blessedly real. With that, the story is over. Let's move to the next story. My childhood home wasn't empty when we returned after 20 years. The key still fit. That was the first warning I should have heeded. The brass house key, tarnished green at the teeth, warm from my pocket, sliding into the front door lock with the same smooth half-turn resistance it had in 1998. No rust seizure, no warped wood jamming the frame, just a soft click, like the house had been waiting, like it had kept the door unlocked. "Huh?" I said, pulling the door open. Dust motes swirled in the late afternoon sun, slicing through the storm door's cracked upper pane. The same crack, I realized, from when I'd thrown a baseball at 12 and missed the glove my dad held out for practice. Still turns. My sister Lena stood behind me, arms crossed over her chest, sunglasses pushed up into her dark hair. She didn't step forward. "Smells off," she murmured. It did. Not the expected reek of mildew, rodent decay, or stagnant air. Instead, wax, lemon oil, and underneath it, faint but undeniable, vanilla. Her vanilla. Mom's favorite candle scent. The one she burned every Sunday while grading papers at the kitchen table. "Impossible," I said, forcing a laugh. "Place has been vacant since the bank took it. 20 years, Lena. Pipes must have frozen and cracked. Maybe mold's mimicking." I stepped inside. The parlor was clean. Not pristine, not restored, but occupied. The floral print sofa, our sofa. The one with the frayed armrest I'd worn smooth with nervous thumb rubbing during thunderstorms, was draped with a crocheted afghan, yellowed but intact. A dusting of fine ash, like from a long burned candle, coated the coffee table's surface, beside a chipped ceramic mug. Inside it, a single, dried-out tea bag, brand Tetley, Mom's only choice. Lena finally entered, her boots clicking on the hardwood, our hardwood, the one spot near the doorway worn silvery from decades of foot traffic. "Who's been here?" she whispered, voice tight. "No one," I said, but my pulse was hammering against my ribs. Bank records were clear. Sheriff's office confirmed it's been sealed since '04. No squatters, no break-ins. We moved deeper. The kitchen. The Formica countertops gleamed under a layer of fine dust. The stove was cold, but the oven light was on, casting a faint, buttery glow inside its cavity. Empty, spotless. On the fridge, held by a magnet shaped like a red apple. The one I'd won at the county fair in '97. A single sheet of paper. Lena reached for it first. Her hand shook. It wasn't a note. It was a list. Grocery list, in Mom's looping, precise cursive. Milk, eggs, 1 Dawes, bread, vanilla tea, James's crackers, saltines, not Ritz, Lena's apples, Granny Smith. Below it, in smaller script added later in blue ink, and don't forget the cake mix, chocolate for Friday. Friday. Today was Friday. I looked at my watch. 4:17 p.m. James. Lena breathed, her eyes wide behind her glasses now. The basement. We'd both thought it, simultaneously, because the list, the vanilla, the cake mix, it pointed to one thing, one ritual. Every Friday, without fail, Mom baked a cake, chocolate, from a box. Because, she'd say, wiping flour on her apron, store-bought cake is a sin, and homemade from scratch is too much trouble on a school night. This is the Goldilocks zone. She'd mix it in the big yellow bowl, humming off-key, and slide it into the oven at exactly 4:30. We'd smell it by 5, rich, warm, promising. The oven light was on, but the oven was cold. We should go, Lena said, backing toward the hall. Call the sheriff. This isn't right. But I was already moving toward the basement door. It stood ajar, not closed, not locked, just open 3 inches. Darkness yawned beyond the crack. The smell intensified as I approached. Vanilla, yes, but now layered with something deeper. Baking chocolate, rich, warm, immediate. James, don't. I pushed the door wider. The stairs descended into gloom. No light switch at the top. Dad had never fixed the one that shorted out in '96. We'd always used the pull chain halfway down. I reached for it. My fingers brushed cold metal. I pulled. The single bare bulb flickered once, twice, then steadied, casting long, wavering shadows down the steep wooden steps. The concrete floor below was swept clean. The old washer and dryer hulking in the corner were draped with sheets, white cotton, like hospital linen. And in the center of the room, beneath the light, stood the yellow mixing bowl. On the counter beside it, a box of Betty Crocker dark chocolate, torn open, a carton of eggs, a half-empty jug of milk. And standing by the bowl, facing away from me, was a woman. She wore a faded floral apron over a cream-colored sweater I hadn't seen in 20 years. The one with the tiny moth holes near the collar, Mom always pretended not to notice. Her hair, streaked with silver now but still pulled back in the same loose bun, was dusted with flour. She was stirring. Slow, rhythmic strokes of the wooden spoon against the ceramic. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound was identical, down to the slight catch where the spoon's edge nicked the bowl's rim, a flaw I'd made at 10 by dropping it on the tile floor. "Mom!" The word escaped me, raw, unbidden. The stirring stopped. She didn't turn, didn't speak, just stood, spoon suspended midair over the bowl. Lena appeared beside me on the stairs, gripping the railing. Her breath hitched. "It's not her," she hissed. "It can't be." But it was. The slope of her shoulders, the way she held her left wrist slightly bent from the arthritis that had started in '99, the tiny scar on her forearm from the bread knife slip in '95. "Mom," I said again, louder, stepping down onto the first stair. "It's us, James and Lena. We're back." Slowly, she turned. Her face was older, gaunt. Deep lines fanned from her eyes and mouth, etched by years we hadn't witnessed. Her skin had a waxy pallor, like marble left too long in shade. But her eyes, Her eyes were the same, warm hazel flecked with gold, filled with a quiet, aching recognition. "Jamie?" she whispered. Her voice was thinner, frayed at the edges, but unmistakable. "Lena." Lena made a small, wounded sound. You died. Car accident. Route 17, March 12th, 2001. We were at the funeral. We buried you." Mom's gaze didn't waver. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "I know, sweetheart. I know what they told you." She set the spoon down gently on the counter, wiped her hands on her apron, a gesture so familiar it punched the air from my lungs. "They got it wrong," she said softly, "about the accident, about me." She walked toward us, her slippers whispering on the concrete. She stopped at the foot of the stairs, looking up. "The car went off the road, yes, but I wasn't in it." Lena's voice cracked. "The police report said the driver was alone, female, unidentified due to trauma." Mom's eyes flickered with pain. "They assumed it was me. My license was in the glove compartment. My scarf was on the passenger seat. It made sense to them." She reached out, her fingers brushing the railing near Lena's hand. Lena flinched, but didn't pull away. "I walked," Mom said. "Afterwards, through the woods, for hours. It was raining, cold. I just kept walking, away from the noise, away from the lights." Her voice dropped to a thread. "Something called me. From the old quarry, a sound like wind through reeds, but it had words in it." She looked past us, up the stairs, toward the kitchen light. "It told me to come home, that you'd be back, that you'd need me, that the house remembered." "The house doesn't remember anything," I said, but my certainty was crumbling, because the vanilla smell was stronger now, thick as syrup, because the chocolate batter in the bowl looked fresh, glistening, dark, flecked with bubbles from vigorous mixing, because the oven light was on and the oven was still cold. "It does," Mom murmured. "Houses hold on to things, emotions, echoes, love." She looked at me, her eyes suddenly sharp, piercing. "Fear!" She turned back to the counter, picked up the spoon. "The cake needs to go in. It's almost 4:30. She moved to the oven, opened it. The light inside blazed, illuminating empty racks. "Mom, wait," I said, descending another step. "How did you survive? Where did you go for 20 years? She didn't look at me as she poured the batter into the greased pan. Her movements were precise, economical, the same way she'd done it 1,000 times. "I came here," she said simply. "Every day I cleaned, I aired the rooms, I bought the groceries, I waited." "For us?" Lena asked, her voice trembling. "For Friday," Mom corrected gently. She slid the pan into the oven, closed the door, and turned the dial. The familiar click hiss of the gas igniting sounded, except there was no flame visible through the oven window. Just darkness and the persistent, unwavering glow of the interior light. "You always came home for cake, remember? Even when you were angry. Even when you thought you hated me. You'd sit at the table and the smell would bring you back." She turned, wiping her hands again, her smile widening. It didn't reach her eyes. They remained deep, still pools of something ancient and waiting. "The house missed you," she said. "It got lonely after they took you away." Took us away. After the funeral, Aunt Carol had moved us to Ohio, sold everything, told us it was for our own good, a fresh start. "Mom," I said, my throat tight, "we need to talk about what happened, about the voice in the quarry." She tilted her head just like she had, The shape in the cemetery years later. A memory slammed into me unbidden, the cold weight on my chest, the layered whispers, the names flooding in. It's not about burying something, it's about giving something, your voice, your attention, your name. Talking is over, Mom said softly. She took a step toward us, then another. Her slippers made no sound on the concrete. Listening is what matters now. The basement light flickered. When it steadied, she was closer, too close. I could smell the vanilla on her skin, see the fine network of cracks at the corners of her eyes, not from age, but from something drier, older, like porcelain left too long in the sun. Lena grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. James, look. She was pointing past Mom at the far wall, where the sheets draped over the washer and dryer had shifted, not fallen. Shifted, revealing not machines, but shapes. Two shapes. Silhouettes pressed against the concrete wall, barely visible under the thin cotton. Tall, thin, featureless, standing perfectly still, and as I stared, one of them, the one on the left, tilted its head, slowly, jointlessly, just like she all had. The oven timer dinged, a sharp, cheerful burring that echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence. Mom turned, her smile serene. There it is, right on time. She walked to the oven, opened the door. Warmth billowed out, not the dry heat of baking, but a damp, earthy warmth, like opening a cellar door in late summer. And the smell, the chocolate smell, was gone, replaced by wet soil, by roots, by the faint, sweet decay of fallen leaves. Inside the oven, the cake pan sat on the middle rack, but the cake wasn't brown, it was gray, the color of old concrete. The surface wasn't smooth, it was textured, pitted, like skin. And rising from its center, pressing against the foil liner, was the unmistakable knotted curve of a human knuckle. Mom reached in, not flinching from the heat, and lifted the pan out. She set it on the counter with a soft clink. Who's first? She asked, her voice suddenly rich, resonant, layered with whispers, dozens of whispers weaving beneath her own. James? Lena? She picked up the knife. The one from the wooden block beside the sink, the long, thin-bladed one Dad used for carving the Thanksgiving turkey. Its edge caught the flickering light as she held it up, and in that light I saw the reflection, not in the blade, in the pan. The gray surface of the cake wasn't just textured, it was moving, ripples passing over it like something beneath was breathing. Mom brought the knife down, not on the cake, on the counter beside it. Thwack! The blade sank deep into the wood. She left it there, quivering. Then she looked at me, her eyes now completely black. No whites, no iris, just endless, depthless obsidian. The house is hungry, Jamie, she whispered, the chorus of voices swelling, filling the basement, vibrating in my teeth, my bones, my blood. It's been so long. She took a step forward. Her hand, cold as riverstone, closed around my wrist, and the oven light, the steady, buttery glow, snuffed out. Darkness flooded the basement, but I could still see her. See them. The two shapes by the wall had stepped free of the sheets. They stood behind her now, tall, thin, waiting, and as Mom leaned in, her breath smelling of vanilla and damp earth, her lips brushing my ear, I heard it again, the sound from the quarry, from the cemetery, from the space behind my own eyes, a sound like wind through reeds, but with words in it, and this time I understood them. Welcome home. Stay, we've saved you a slice. That's where this story ends. Let's continue with the next. My new roommate says she lives in the attic, but the attic is empty. I didn't want to move into the house on Holloway Lane. I had to. Rent in the city had become impossible. Studio apartments going for $2,400 a month with shared bathrooms and cockroach infestations rated mild to moderate by landlords who probably moonlighted as exterminators. My savings, already thin from 2 freelance gigs drying up in the same week, had bled down to a single 3-digit figure. I was sleeping on a friend's couch, but even that charity had an expiration date. Just until you find something, okay? Sarah's sister is coming in 2 weeks. I knew what that meant. You've overstayed. So when I saw the listing, room for rent, $650 a month, utilities included, private bathroom, quiet neighborhood, I should have known it was too good to be true. Even the photos looked suspicious. Slightly blurry, low-light shots of a narrow hallway, a kitchen with outdated linoleum, and a fridge that looked older than me in the room itself, a decent-sized space with a window, a closet, and a wrought-iron bed frame that somehow managed to look both elegant and ominous. No photo of the exterior, no address, just Holloway Lane, East Hills. I Googled the street. There was an East Hills neighborhood, but Holloway Lane didn't appear on city maps. Only on old county plat surveys archived by the local historical society, a dead-end street, mostly undeveloped until the 1920s. One structure built in 1912, demolition permit filed in 1978, never executed. I called the number. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was soft, so soft I had to turn up the volume. Not breathy, not raspy, just low. Like she was speaking through a thick blanket, calm, measured. "Hello, this is Eleanor," she said. I introduced myself, asked about the room. She didn't hesitate. "It's available immediately. The house is old but sound, solid brick, slate roof. The room is on the 2nd floor, southwest corner. You'll have the bathroom across the hall to yourself. I live upstairs." "Upstairs?" I asked. "The attic?" A pause. Not long, less than a second, but I felt it. "Yes," she said. "I live in the attic." I laughed. Nervous, automatic. "Oh, wow. Cozy." She didn't laugh back. "It's larger than it looks from the outside. Would you like to see it?" I said yes. She gave me the address. 7 Holloway Lane, and directions that involved turning off a service road behind the old rail yard, past a collapsed chain-link fence, onto a gravel track overgrown with sumac and wild rose. The GPS lost signal 3 blocks in. I followed handwritten signs nailed to trees. Holloway, in uneven black marker. The last one had a small, crude drawing of a house beneath the arrow. The house stood alone at the end of the lane, a 2.5-story colonial in faded brick, with white trim peeling like sunburnt skin. The slate roof was intact, though several tiles were cracked or missing, exposing the underlayment like scabs. The front porch sagged slightly in the center, but held. A brass knob on the front door gleamed, polished, incongruously bright against the weathered wood. Eleanor was waiting inside the open doorway. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, but slender, almost fragile-looking. She wore a high-collared dress in dark green wool, the kind you'd see in a 1940s catalog. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, strands escaping like frayed rope. Her face was pale, not sickly, just unexposed. No makeup. Her eyes were gray, the color of overcast sea, and when she looked at me, I felt a strange pressure behind my sternum, like a held breath I hadn't realized I was keeping. Daniel," she said, smiling faintly. "You came." I nodded, suddenly self-conscious in my jeans and hoodie. "Yeah, thanks for meeting me." She stepped aside. "Come in. Mind the third step? It's loose." The interior was cleaner than I expected. Not modern clean, but cared-for clean. Dust was absent. The hardwood floors had been refinished, recently by the look of the amber sheen, and the wallpaper in the hallway, though floral and faded, was intact. No tears, no bubbling. The air smelled faintly of beeswax, lavender, and something else, something dry and old, like paper left in a sealed drawer for decades. She showed me the kitchen first, functional if dated. A gas stove with chrome knobs, a porcelain sink, a cupboard where she kept a single white teacup and saucer, no dishes, no coffee maker, no signs of cooking. "The room is this way," she said. We climbed the stairs, solid, no creaks, and she led me to the southwest corner. The room was exactly as in the photos. A wrought iron bed with a white quilt, a wooden dresser, a small writing desk by the window overlooking the backyard, overgrown but not wild. Someone had trimmed the brush into rough borders, like the beginnings of a garden never finished. The closet door was slightly ajar. Inside, bare shelves, no hangers. "The bathroom is across the hall," she said. "Hot water is reliable. The boiler was replaced last year." I opened the window. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. No traffic noise, no distant sirens, just wind in the trees and, faintly, the tick-tick-tick of a clock somewhere deep in the house. "How much is it again?" I asked. $650. Utilities included. First and last month plus a $200 deposit. You can move in tonight if you'd like. That sealed it. I signed the lease on the kitchen table with a ballpoint pen she produced from a drawer. The document was typed on thick, yellowed paper, the ink slightly faded. No notary, no landlord LLC, just Eleanor Voss. At the bottom, in looping cursive that looked like it belonged in a diary from 1923, she accepted my check, cashier's, pre-signed, just in case, and handed me a brass key on a leather fob. "This is for your room. The front door doesn't lock. I never lock it." "Never?" She tilted her head. "No one comes here but us." I moved in that evening. My things fit easily. A duffel bag, a box of books, my laptop, a framed photo of my parents, both gone now, car accident 5 years ago, and a small Bluetooth speaker I used for white noise. I set up the bed, hung 2 shirts in the closet, plugged in my lamp. The house was quiet, not empty. Quiet. Not the silence of vacancy. It was occupied quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision, just shadows shifting as the light changed, but when I turned, nothing was there. At 9:37 p.m., I heard the first sound, a thump, soft, muffled, from directly above me. I froze. The attic. Eleanor lived in the attic. I waited, listened, nothing, then tap, 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 like fingernails on wood. I stood, walked to the center of the room, and looked up at the ceiling. The plaster was smooth, no cracks, no water stains. The sound hadn't been loud, but it was close, as if someone were lying on the floorboards right above me, tapping their fingers against the underside of the ceiling. "Eleanor?" I called, voice too loud in the stillness. No answer. I waited 10 minutes, then 15. The silence returned, heavier now. I brushed my teeth, changed into pajamas, shut off the lamp. Darkness. The house exhaled. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own pulse. Then, creak. Not from above, from the hallway. A floorboard. Someone was walking, slow, deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. Stopping outside my door. I held my breath. The doorknob turned, not all the way, just a fraction, less than an inch, then stopped. I didn't move, didn't blink. After 20 seconds, it turned back. The footsteps retreated. I waited until 2:13 a.m. before I finally slept. The next morning, I found Eleanor in the kitchen pouring tea from a ceramic pot into her single white cup. "You slept well?" she asked, not looking up. "Fine," I said. "Just adjusting." She nodded. "The house takes time." I hesitated. "I heard footsteps last night, outside my door." She lifted the cup, sipped. "The floors settle, especially at night, when the temperature drops." It sounded like someone walking. "The wood contracts. It can mimic footsteps, very convincingly." I wanted to believe her, but that afternoon, while unpacking my books, I found something tucked behind the dresser. A photograph. Small, 3x5 inches, black and white, slightly curled at the edges. A woman standing on the porch of this very house. Same brick, same sagging steps. She wore a dress identical to Eleanor's, high-collared, dark wool, her hair in the same tight bun. Her face, Eleanor's face, except the photo was dated, handwritten in pencil on the back, June 17th, 1924. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I slipped it into my wallet. That night, the tapping returned. Tap, tap, tap. Louder. Then a new sound. Dragging. Slow, heavy, like something being pulled across the floor above me. I got out of bed, turned on the light, and stood in the center of the room again. "Eleanor," I called. Silence. Then, thump, directly above. I grabbed my phone, opened the flashlight, and walked into the hallway. The stairs to the attic were at the far end of the second-floor hall, behind a narrow door I hadn't noticed before, painted the same color as the wall, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. It had no knob, just a small iron latch. I lifted it. The door opened inward with a sigh, dry hinges, no squeak. A staircase rose into darkness. No light switch. I shone my phone up. Narrow wooden steps, steep, dusty but not thickly so, disturbed recently. Footprints? Too dim to tell. I climbed 7 steps, 8. The air grew colder with each one. At the top, another door, smaller, lower. A pull string dangled from the ceiling just inside. I pulled it. A bare bulb flickered twice, then glowed with a weak yellow light. The attic was empty, not cluttered with old stuff, empty. Utterly empty. No boxes, no furniture, no insulation bunched in corners, just raw rafters, exposed beams, and wide pine floorboards, sanded smooth and gleaming faintly in the dim light. The space was larger than it should have been, stretching nearly the full footprint of the house. But there were no partitions, no beds, no signs of habitation, no Eleanor. I walked to the center, turned slowly. Nothing. But the floor, near the far wall where the roof sloped down, the wood was darker, stained. I knelt. The stain wasn't water. It was irregular, roughly circular, about 3 feet across. Dark, brown, black, deeply absorbed into the grain. I ran my finger over it. Dry. Cold. I looked up, directly beneath where I was kneeling, my bedroom ceiling. That's where the tapping had come from. I stood, heart thudding. Then I saw it. On the nearest rafter, a single strand of hair, long, dark, coiled around a nail. I reached for it. The bulb above me flickered, once, twice, then went out. Darkness. I didn't move. In the black, I heard it. A breath. Not mine. Close. Behind me. I spun, flashlight sweeping the space, empty, but the air, it had changed, thick, stale, like the inside of a sealed coffin, and beneath the dust and wood, I smelled it now, lavender, and something else, copper, blood. I backed toward the stairs, light shaking in my hand. When I reached the attic door, I slammed it shut, and through the latch, I leaned against it, breathing hard. Downstairs, the grandfather clock in the front hall chimed. Once, it was 3:07 a.m. I didn't hear it strike again. The next day I drove to the county records office. It took 3 hours, 2 clerks, and a favor called in from a friend who knew someone in archives. But I found it. The deed for 7 Holloway Lane, transferred from Silas Voss to Eleanor Voss in 1923. Then, nothing. No subsequent transfers, no death certificate filed for Eleanor Voss. But in the East Hills Gazette, October 12th, 1924, local woman found dead in attic. Eleanor Voss, 28, was discovered yesterday in the attic of her Holloway Lane residence by her brother Silas. Authorities report no signs of forced entry, cause of death pending autopsy, though preliminary findings suggest internal trauma. Miss Voss, a recluse in recent years, had reportedly refused to leave the attic for several months prior to her death. The home remains in the Voss family, though uninhabited since the incident. I sat in my car staring at the photocopy, refused to leave the attic. Found dead in the attic. I looked at the photo in my wallet. Eleanor on the porch, June 17th, 1924. 3 months before she died. That night, I locked my bedroom door, the first time. I'd never bothered before. Why lock a door in an empty house? But now, I turned a deadbolt I didn't know existed until I'd pressed my shoulder against the frame and felt the mechanism click. At 11:48 p.m., the tapping began. Tap, tap, tap. Then, scritch, scratch, like nails on wood, louder, closer, then a voice, so quiet I thought I imagined it at first. Daniel, my name, spoken in Eleanor's voice, soft, low, muffled by the ceiling. Let me in. I sat up, gripping the edge of the mattress. Silence. Then, thump. A heavy impact, right above the bed. The ceiling shuddered. Plaster dust sifted down. I scrambled out of bed, backed into the corner. Daniel! Again. Closer now. Not from above, from inside the wall. I shone my phone at the closet. The door, previously slightly ajar, was now closed. Locked? I didn't know it could lock. I approached slowly, put my ear to the wood. Silence. Then tap. From inside the closet, I yanked the door open, empty. But the back panel, the false wall I hadn't noticed before, set a foot behind the real one, was slightly warped, and in the center a hairline crack. I pressed my hand against it, cold, then push. The panel gave, just an inch. Behind it, darkness and a breath. I slammed the door shut, locked it, using a chair I jammed under the knob. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I packed my duffel. I was leaving. No notice, no refund. I'd eat the loss. As I zipped the bag, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. Step, pause. Step, pause. Stopping outside my door. The knob turned. The chair held. A pause. Then a whisper through the keyhole. Why are you leaving, Daniel? I didn't answer. You're safe here, she said. Safer than out there. A beat. You don't know what waits for you in the world. I stood, gripping the strap of my bag. I'm not staying, I said, voice steadier than I felt. Silence. Then a new sound from the attic. A thud. Then another, closer, like something falling down the stairs. Thud. Halfway. Thud. near the top of the second-floor landing. Thud. Outside my door, I backed away. The doorknob rattled, not turning, shaking violently. The wood around the latch groaned. Then silence. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. I crept forward, put my ear to the door. Nothing. I lifted the chair, turned the knob. The hallway was empty, but the attic door wide open, and on the top step, a single white teacup shattered. Shards scattered down the first 3 stairs. Steam still rose from the puddle of tea. I ran out the front door, down the gravel drive. Didn't stop until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, got in, locked the doors, started the engine. As I backed onto the road, I glanced at the house. Eleanor stood in the upstairs window, the one in my room, watching me. She wasn't smiling, she was crying. Tears traced clean lines down her cheeks. Her mouth moved. I rolled down the window, just enough. Her voice carried, clear, soft, final. "You'll come back." I drove, didn't look back. I lasted 3 days in a motel, then my card declined. The deposit on the Holloway house was non-refundable. The lease, technically binding, and when I called the number on the lease, it rang 7 times. Then Eleanor answered. "Daniel," she said, as if I'd never left. "I've been waiting." I didn't speak. "The room is still yours," she said. "The bed is made. The quilt is warm." A pause. "You know you can't stay away." I hung up, but that night, in the dark motel room, I heard it. Tap, 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 from the ceiling. And when I shone my light up, a hairline crack was forming in the plaster, dark, wet, spreading like a mouth. I checked out the next morning, drove straight to Holloway Lane. The front door was unlocked. Eleanor wasn't in the kitchen. I went upstairs. My room, exactly as I'd left it, bed made, quilt smooth, closet door closed. I set my bag down, walked to the center of the room, looked up. The ceiling was pristine, no cracks, no stains, just smooth white plaster. I sat on the edge of the bed, waited. At 9:37 p.m., it began. Tap, tap, tap. Then, "Daniel." I closed my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. A pause. Then, thump, soft, directly above. I stood, walked to the attic door, lifted the latch. The stairs waited. I climbed, pulled the string. The bulb flickered once, then glowed steady. The attic was still empty, except in the center of the floor, a wrought iron bed, same as mine, white quilt, pillows fluffed, and on the pillow, a single strand of dark hair. I didn't turn around. I heard her step onto the top stair, felt the shift in air as she entered. "Welcome home," Eleanor said. I nodded, took a breath, lay down on the bed. The quilt was warm. She sat beside me. Her hand, cold, dry, brushed my forehead. "You'll sleep better now," she whispered, and I did, because the tapping had stopped. The dragging had stopped. The footsteps had stopped. All that remained was the sound of breathing, hers and mine, matching, slowing, until they were the same, until I couldn't tell which was which, until I didn't need to. I live in the attic now. It's larger than it looks from the outside, and sometimes, when the house is quiet and the moon is high, I hear footsteps on the stairs, a knock at the attic door, a voice, soft and hopeful. "Hello? Is anyone here?" And I rise, walk to the door, open it just a crack, smile. "Come in," I say. "The room is ready. I never lock the front door. No one comes here. But someone always does. And this story ends here. The next one begins now. The babysitter I hired doesn't exist, but she still sends me pictures. It began with a lie, though at the time I thought it was a lifeline. The lie was a website called sittersafe.com with its calming blue and white color scheme, its stock photos of happy, racially diverse families, and its promise of peace of mind for working parents. I was the target demographic, distilled to my purest, most desperate form. A single father, recently widowed, working a job that demanded more of me than I had to give. My daughter, Maya, was 6 years old, a tiny, fierce creature with her mother's wide, curious eyes and a spirit that deserved more than a tired, grieving father fumbling his way through each day. Her name on the website was Clara Bell. Her profile was a masterpiece of curated trustworthiness. The photo showed a young woman in her mid-20s with a kind, open face, a sprinkle of freckles across her nose, and warm, intelligent eyes. She was wearing a sensible cardigan. Her bio was pitch perfect, a child development major, certified in CPR and first aid, with a passion for creative play and a list of glowing 5-star reviews that seemed almost too good to be true. Clara was a gift, one review gushed. Our little Alfie is usually so shy, but he took to her immediately. Professional, punctual, and so wonderful with our kids. Another read, she even tidied the kitchen, a true gem. I did my due diligence. I paid the extra fee for the premium background check, which came back spotless. We had a video call, and she was just as she appeared in her photo, charming, articulate, and genuinely interested in Maya's love for dinosaurs and sparkly glue. She asked all the right questions. I felt the tight, persistent knot of anxiety in my chest loosen for the first time in months. I hired her for the following Friday night. I had a crucial dinner meeting with a client I couldn't miss. It was the first time I would be leaving Maya with someone other than her grandmother since Sarah had passed. That Friday, she arrived exactly on time. In person, she was even more disarmingly normal. She had a gentle voice and a calm, centered presence that immediately put Maya at ease. She'd brought a tote bag with a new coloring book and a set of crayons that had a glittery sheen. When I left, Maya was sitting at the kitchen table with her, chattering away, already fully under her spell. I drove to my meeting feeling a profound, almost dizzying sense of relief. The first picture arrived at 7:45 p.m. It was a photo of Maya holding up a drawing of a lopsided purple T-Rex. She was beaming, a gap-toothed smile of pure, unadulterated joy. The caption read, "The fearsome Mayasaurus, having a great time." More pictures followed throughout the evening. A shot of Maya in her pajamas, listening intently as Clara read a storybook. A blurry action shot of them building a pillow fort in the living room. Each photo was a little balm to my worried soul, a digital reassurance that I had made the right choice, that my daughter was safe and happy. The last picture came at 9:30 p.m. It was a photo of Maya fast asleep in her bed, her favorite stuffed sloth, Mr. Higgins, tucked under her arm. The soft glow of her rocket ship nightlight cast a warm, peaceful aura over the scene. Safe and sound. Good night from us. When I got home around 11, the house was silent and immaculate. The pillow fort was gone, the toys were back in their chest, and the kitchen was cleaner than I'd left it. I crept into Maya's room and saw the exact scene from the photograph. A perfect tableau of sleeping innocence. I felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it almost brought me to tears. Clara became our regular babysitter. Every week or two I'd book her, and every time it was the same flawless experience. And the pictures became our ritual. They were my window into their evenings, a steady stream of happy, reassuring moments. They were proof that I wasn't failing my daughter, that even in my absence, her life could be filled with fun and care. The first discordant note, the first tiny crack in the perfect facade, occurred about 2 months in. It was a Tuesday night. I was working from home, trying to meet a deadline. Maya was asleep upstairs. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a picture message from Clara's number. I opened it. It was a photo of Maya, asleep in her bed, clutching Mr. Higgins, bathed in the glow of her nightlight. It was an almost identical replica of the picture she sent on her first night. The caption read, "So peaceful when she sleeps." I stared at the photo, a cold, confusing prickle of unease running down my spine. It was a Tuesday. Clara wasn't here. She wasn't scheduled to be. I was the only other person in the house. I checked the timestamp. The photo had been sent just seconds ago. My first instinct was rationalization. It must be a glitch, a delayed message from her last visit. But the caption felt immediate. I stood up, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I walked quietly up the stairs, my every sense on high alert. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I pushed open Maya's door. She was there, in her bed, exactly as she was in the photo, fast asleep. I backed out of the room, my skin crawling. I texted Clara back. "Strange question, but did you just send me a photo?" The reply was instantaneous. "Yes, just thinking about what a sweet girl she is. Hope you both are having a good week." It was a plausible, if slightly odd, explanation. Maybe she was looking through old photos on her phone and sent one by mistake, then tried to play it off. It was weird, but not impossible. I tried to dismiss it, but the image of that photo, sent from outside my house, depicting a real-time event happening within it, was a splinter in my mind that I couldn't quite remove. The following week, I needed to book her again. I logged on to sittersafe.com and searched for her. Profile, nothing. I tried different search parameters. Still nothing. A profile not found error message appeared on the screen. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I went to our old messages on the site's platform. The conversation thread was there, but when I clicked on her name, the same error message popped up. Her profile had vanished. I pulled out my phone and called her number. A generic, synthesized voice responded, "The number you have dialed has been disconnected." Panic, cold and sharp, began to seep into my veins. This made no sense. I contacted SitterSafe's customer support. I spent 20 minutes on hold, listening to a tinny, looping piece of instrumental music that frayed my already raw nerves. Finally, a bored-sounding man named Kevin answered. I explained the situation, gave him Clara Bell's name. He put me on hold again. When he came back, his voice was different, cautious. "Sir, we've checked our records. We have no history of a sitter named Clara Bell ever having a profile on our platform." "That's impossible," I said, my voice rising. "I hired her through your site. I have the messages. I paid for a background check." "We have a record of your payments, sir," Kevin said slowly. "But they were for background checks on 3 other potential sitters, all of whom you declined to hire. There's no record of you ever even viewing a profile for a Clara Bell, let alone hiring her." My blood ran cold. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. I was in a nightmare. A woman had been in my house. She had been alone with my daughter. And according to the very service that had supposedly vetted her, she didn't exist. My first overwhelming impulse was to protect Maya. I changed every lock in the house. I bought a state-of-the-art security system with cameras covering every entrance, every angle. I spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilant terror, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, my phone clutched in my hand like a talisman. The pictures stopped. For 3 weeks, there was silence. I started to breathe again. I told myself it was some elaborate, terrifying scam, a phantom hacker who had created a ghost profile to get my credit card information. I told myself the danger had passed. Then the pictures started again. It was a Monday morning. I had just dropped Maya off at school. As I was pulling away from the curb, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. The picture was of Maya on the school playground. She was on the swings, her head thrown back in laughter. It was a beautiful, candid shot, except for the angle. It was taken from high up, as if from the roof of the school, a place no one should have been. And the photo was unnervingly intimate, a stolen moment of pure joy. Beneath it, a single line of text. She has your laugh. I almost crashed the car. My vision tunneled. My lungs felt like they were collapsing. It wasn't a scam. It wasn't over. Whoever or whatever Clara was, she was still watching us. The pictures became more frequent, more invasive. A photo of me at my desk, taken through the window of my home office. A picture of our grocery cart at the supermarket. The contents, a perfect reflection of our weekly shopping list. A picture of my car parked outside my office. The photographer was everywhere and nowhere. The police were useless. I went to him, my phone in my hand, a wild-eyed, sleep-deprived man trying to explain that he was being stalked by a ghost. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They took a report, but without a suspect, without a crime beyond sending unsolicited photos, there was nothing they could do. They suggested I block the numbers. I did. She just used new ones. Maya started talking about her. She didn't call her Clara. She called her the picture lady. The picture lady was watching me play today, she said one evening, pushing her peas around her plate. What do you mean, sweetie? I asked, my voice tight. At the park. She was hiding behind a big tree. She waved at me. What did she look like, Maya? She was blurry, Maya said, frowning, like a picture that's all fuzzy. And she smells like old books, like Mommy's old books in the attic. The attic, my wife's collection of antique photography books. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. The next day, after dropping Maya at her grandmother's, I tore the attic apart. In the back, under a dusty canvas sheet, was a heavy wooden trunk I hadn't opened since Sarah died. It was filled with her prized possessions, old cameras, development equipment, and stacks of antique photographs and glass plate negatives she had bought at estate sales. I spent hours sifting through them, my heart pounding with a nameless dread. I was looking for a face, the kind freckled face from the CitiSafe profile. I didn't find it, but I found something else. It was a series of family portraits from the late 1800s, all from the same estate. The family was stern-faced and severe, posing stiffly for the camera, and in the background of several of the photos, slightly out of focus, was a young woman in a nanny's uniform, Her features were indistinct, but there was a certain posture, a certain tilt of the head that made my skin crawl. In the final photograph of the series, a picture of two small children playing with wooden hoops. The nanny was in the background, standing by a window, and she was staring directly at this camera. Her face was a pale oval blur, but her eyes were clear, sharp, and filled with a possessive, unsettling intensity. At the bottom of the trunk, I found an old, leather-bound ledger from the estate. It was a record of household staff. My finger traced down the list of names until it stopped. 1888, 1891. Governess, Clara Bell. The entry was followed by a single, spidery notation. Dismissed. Unwholesome attachment to the children. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't a stalker. This was something else entirely, something ancient and impossible. A ghost who had imprinted herself onto these photographs, who had lain dormant in my attic for years. Had our grief, our loneliness, somehow woken her up? Had my desperate search for a caregiver on the internet provided her with a new medium, a new way to manifest? The pictures changed. They were no longer just of our present. One morning, I received a photo of me as a child, playing in the front yard of my childhood home. A home that was 1,000 miles away. A home my parents had sold 20 years ago. It was a real photograph, one I recognized from an old family album, but it was altered. Standing in the background, partially obscured by a tree, was the faint, translucent figure of a woman in a long, dark dress. She was inserting herself into my past. She was rewriting my history, weaving her ghostly presence into the very fabric of my life. The final straw came last night. My phone buzzed on my nightstand. I've become conditioned to the sound, reacting to it with a Pavlovian jolt of fear. I knew what it would be, but I was compelled to look. The picture that loaded on my screen was not from the past. It was not of the present. It was of a future I couldn't comprehend. It was a family portrait. I was in it, standing beside an older, grayer version of myself. Maya was there too, a young woman now, with the same sad, vacant expression as the man who was her father. We both looked pale, drained, like faded copies of ourselves, and standing between us, her arms wrapped around both of our shoulders in a gesture of maternal possession, was Clara Bell. Her face was perfectly clear, no longer a blur, no longer a photo on a website. She was solid, real, and she was smiling, a wide, triumphant, terrifying smile. She wasn't just watching us anymore. She was joining us. She was feeding on our lives, our memories, our very vitality. The caption beneath the photo was the most chilling of all. Soon we'll all be together, a perfect family, forever. I'm writing this now because I don't know what else to do. I've packed a bag. Maya and I are leaving. We're going to drive until we run out of road. I'm going to throw my phone into a river. I'm going to get a new one, a new number, a new life. But I know it won't matter. She's not tied to a place, not anymore. She's not just a ghost in the attic or a phantom on the internet. She's attached to us. She's a virus in our lives, and she's been sending me snapshots of our own destruction. I look at my beautiful sleeping daughter, and I know I have to try. I have to run, but I fear, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that no matter where we go, her pictures will follow. And one day, I'll receive that final faded photograph, not as a warning, but as a welcome home That's where this story ends. Let's continue with the next. The portrait above my bed slowly turns its head at night. The rent was suspiciously low, not just a little below market, laughably low. Historic character, the listing had said. Original fixtures, serene solitude. The photos showed a narrow 3-story row house in the oldest part of the city, wedged between buildings that leaned into each other like gossiping neighbors. My new home, or rather, my new cell. After the layoffs, my savings evaporated faster than morning mist, and this was the only thing I could afford that wasn't a converted storage unit or a shared bathroom nightmare in some crumbling flophouse. The owner, a woman named Mrs. Gable, who sounded like she gargled gravel, met me with a set of keys that felt unnaturally cold and heavy. She barely glanced at me, her eyes fixed on the top-floor apartment door. "Third floor's yours. Mind the stairs? They groan. Don't touch the portrait in the bedroom. It's sensitive." She thrust the keys into my hand, turned on her heel, and was gone before I could ask what portrait she meant. The whole interaction lasted less than a minute. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust, old paper, and something else, faintly metallic, like dried blood, or perhaps just the rust from the ancient radiators. The apartment itself was cramped, but surprisingly intact. High ceilings, intricate crown molding blackened with age, and windows so grimy the daylight struggled to penetrate. The bedroom, tucked under the eaves at the very top, was the smallest room. It held a narrow bed, a rickety dresser, and one piece of furniture that immediately commanded attention. A tall, ornate wooden wardrobe that seemed to absorb the dim light. But it was the wall above the bed that froze me in the doorway. There, hanging slightly askew on the peeling floral wallpaper, was an oil painting, a portrait. It depicted a woman seated stiffly in a high-backed chair that looked like carved oak. She wore a severe black dress with a high collar that seemed to strangle her neck, buttoned all the way to her chin. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it must have ached, revealing a high, pale forehead and sharp cheekbones. Her eyes were the unsettling part. Large, dark, and painted with an almost photographic realism that made them seem to follow you as you moved. They weren't kind eyes. They were watchful, cold, calculating. A faint, humorless line suggested the ghost of a smile, but it didn't reach those obsidian eyes. She looked displeased, disappointed even. The painting itself was old, the canvas yellowed and cracked like dried mud, the frame heavy and carved with intricate thorny vines that seemed to writhe in the low light. This had to be the sensitive portrait. A shiver, unrelated to the room's chill, traced my spine. I'd sleep here tonight. I'd deal with it tomorrow. The first night was a symphony of unfamiliar sounds. The building settled with deep, groaning sighs. Pipes clanged like ghostly percussion in the walls. Wind whistled through unseen cracks around the window frame. But I was exhausted, physically and mentally drained from the move and the months of job hunting. I fell into a fitful sleep quickly, lulled by the rhythmic creak of the bed frame beneath me. I woke just before dawn, disoriented, my neck stiff from the thin pillow. Gray light filtered through the grimy window. As I blinked away sleep, my gaze drifted upwards, toward the portrait. My breath caught in my throat. It was facing me. Not directly, not head-on, but its angle had changed. When I'd gone to bed, the woman's face had been turned slightly away, her gaze directed towards the window, towards the wall. Now, her head was tilted just a few degrees more towards the center of the room, towards the bed, towards me. Her dark eyes seemed to hold a new intensity in the weak morning light, as if she'd been watching my sleep. My heart hammered against my ribs. Impossible, I told myself. Trick of the light. You were half asleep. The frame must have slipped on the nail. I got up, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The change was subtle, but undeniable. The direction of her gaze had shifted. I reached up, my fingers trembling slightly, and touched the heavy frame. It was solidly fixed to the wall. No give, no sign it had moved. I tried to dismiss it. Old houses, settling walls. My own anxiety painting phantoms on the canvas. I spent the day hunting for work, the image of those watchful eyes lingering in the back of my mind. But the exhaustion returned that night, and I crawled into bed, deliberately avoiding looking at the portrait, focusing instead on the cracks in the ceiling until sleep claimed me. I woke to the sound of my own heartbeat. It was deep in the night, the kind of silence so profound it feels like pressure on your eardrums. The city's usual hum was absent, muffled by a thick fog that had rolled in off the river. I didn't know what had woken me. No sound, no movement, just a feeling, a prickle on the back of my neck. Slowly, dreading what I might see, I turned my head towards the wall above the bed. The portrait was facing me directly, head on. Those dark painted eyes were fixed on mine with unnerving precision. The slight, cruel curve of her lips seemed more pronounced in the gloom. The thorny vines on the frame looked sharper, more menacing. A wave of cold, deeper than the room's chill, washed over me. My skin crawled. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't a trick of the light. The painting had moved. While I slept, it had turned its head to look at me. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I scrambled out of bed, fumbling for my phone, my fingers clumsy with fear. The screen's harsh light made me squint, but I needed proof. I aimed a camera at the portrait. The image on the screen showed the woman, head on, eyes staring unblinkingly into the lens. I took a picture, then another. I checked the timestamp, 2:47 a.m. I didn't sleep again. I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in the thin blanket, my eyes locked on the portrait, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. It just watched. The feeling of being observed was so intense it was physical, a weight pressing on my chest. Dawn felt like a reprieve. The next day I confronted Mrs. Gable. I found her in the dim, cluttered lobby, sorting through a stack of envelopes. "The portrait," I said, my voice tight. "In the bedroom. It's moving." She didn't look up. Her gnarled fingers kept sorting. "Moving? Nonsense!" But her voice lacked its usual gravelly confidence. There was a hesitation, a flicker of something, fear, in her rheumy eyes. "It's turning its head," I insisted, showing her the photo on my phone. "Look, at 2:47 this morning, it was facing the wall when I went to sleep." She peered at the screen, then looked away sharply, as if the image burned. "That's Eleanor Vance," she muttered, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Lived here in the 1890s, owned the whole building, died unhappily." She swallowed. "She didn't like guests, especially not in her room. She always said her portrait should watch over the space, keep things proper." She finally met my eyes, her gaze intense. "Don't look at it when you go to sleep. Don't acknowledge it. Just pretend it's not there. And for God's sake, don't take it down. She doesn't like that. She turned back to her envelopes, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. Her warning only deepened the dread. Don't acknowledge it. But how could I not? Those eyes were a constant, silent accusation. I tried. I went to bed facing the wall, pulling the pillow over my head, but sleep was impossible. I could feel its gaze on the back of my skull, a cold, insistent pressure. On the third night, I couldn't take it. I got up, grabbed a large sheet I'd found in a closet, and threw it over the portrait, tucking the corners tightly around the frame until the entire painting was shrouded in dusty white linen. The relief was immediate, almost dizzying. The oppressive weight in the room lifted. I slept soundly for the first time since moving in. I woke to silence. Not the peaceful silence of before, but a thick, waiting quiet. And the sheet was on the floor, neatly folded as if someone had carefully removed it and placed it at the foot of the bed. The portrait was uncovered, and it was facing me again, not just head on. Its head was tilted slightly, the painted eyes narrowed, the ghost of a smile now looking distinctly smug. A fresh wave of terror, colder and more profound than before, washed over me. It wasn't just watching. It was reacting. It was offended. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the armchair I'd dragged into the bedroom, a baseball bat I'd bought that day resting across my lap, my eyes fixed on the portrait. The hours crawled by. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. The fog pressed against the window, muting the world outside into a silent gray void. The only sound was the frantic thudding of my own heart and the occasional groan of the old building. I must have dozed off, slumped in the chair for a moment. Just a moment. I woke with a jolt. The room was colder, much colder. My breath plumed in the air. And the portrait, it wasn't just turned towards me, it was leaning forward. The angle of the head was sharper, more aggressive. The painted eyes seemed darker, deeper, like pools of ink that could swallow you whole. The smug expression was gone, replaced by something far worse. Hunger. A cold, patient hunger. The thorny vines on the frame seemed to writhe subtly, as if straining against the wood. I couldn't stay. I couldn't. I gathered my few belongings in a frantic rush, stuffing clothes into my backpack. I avoided looking at the wall. I just needed to get out the door. As I shouldered the pack and turned towards the bedroom exit, my peripheral vision caught movement, not on the wall, on the canvas itself. The painted eyes had tracked me. They weren't fixed on the center of the room anymore. They were locked onto my moving form, following me as I headed for the door. A whimper escaped my lips. I ran. I didn't stop until I was 3 blocks away, leaning against a lamppost, gasping for breath in the damp night air. I'd sleep on a friend's couch. Anywhere but there. But the next morning, bleary-eyed and hollow, I realized I'd left my wallet on the dresser, my ID, my last bit of cash, my only credit card. Groaning, I knew I had to go back just for a minute. In the daylight, with sunlight streaming through the grimy windows, the apartment felt different, less threatening. The portrait hanging above the bed looked inert, just an old painting of a stern woman. The terror of the night seemed absurd in the clear light. "It's just paint and canvas," I told myself firmly. "You're being ridiculous." I grabbed the wallet from the dresser, my eyes deliberately averted from the wall. I was almost out the door when curiosity, that fatal human flaw, got the better of me. Just a quick look, to prove to myself it was nothing. I turned. The portrait was facing the window again, as it had been on the first night. Relief, warm and sweet, flooded me. It was over. My mind had played tricks in the dark. I'd imagined it all. I practically skipped down the 3 flights of stairs, the heavy front door of the building closing behind me with a solid thud. Freedom. That night, on my friend's lumpy sofa, I slept deeply, dreamlessly. No cold pressure, no watchful eyes, just blessed ordinary sleep. I stayed with my friend for a week, using the time to finally land a temp job, enough to scrape together first and last month's rent on a tiny ground-floor studio across town. A place with no portraits, no history, just clean walls and fluorescent lights. The night before I was due to move into my new place, I was packing the last of my things from my friend's apartment. It was late. Rain lashed against the windows. My friend was already asleep. I was alone in the living room, folding a sweater, when I felt it again. That prickle on the back of my neck, that cold pressure. My blood ran cold. I slowly turned my head. There, propped against the far wall, leaning in the shadowed corner behind my friend's bookshelf, was the portrait, Eleanor Vance. Her eyes, impossibly dark and real in the low lamplight, were fixed on me. Her head was tilted at that familiar, hungry angle. The thorny vines on the frame seemed to pulse in the gloom. How? I hadn't brought it. I'd left it hanging in that cursed room. Panic, pure and icy, seized me. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the painting. My friend's apartment door was behind me. I fumbled for the handle, my hand slick with sweat. I yanked it open and stumbled out into the dimly lit hallway, slamming the door shut and leaning against it, gasping. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the hallway, too terrified to go back in, too terrified to be alone anywhere else. Moving into the new studio was supposed to be my fresh start. I chose a plain, modern building with wide hallways and bright lights. My bedroom was small but spotless, with a single unadorned wall above the bed. Perfect. Safe. I slept deeply that first night, utterly exhausted, but finally free of the weight of those eyes. Or so I thought. I woke just before dawn. The room was filled with a soft, gray light. And there, hanging dead center on the blank wall above my new bed, was the portrait of Eleanor Vance. The heavy, thorny frame looked utterly out of place against the smooth beige paint. It hadn't been there when I went to sleep. I hadn't hung it. No one else had a key. My legs gave out. I slid down the wall onto the floor, staring up at the painting in numb horror. Her head wasn't just turned towards me. It was tilted forward, straining off the canvas. Her dark eyes held a terrifying new depth, a swirling vortex of cold malice and ancient hunger. The ghost of a smile was gone. Her painted lips were slightly parted, as if whispering secrets only the dead could hear. The air in the room was frigid, my breath a constant plume. And then, slowly, deliberately, the painted eyes blinked. A choked sob escaped me. I scrambled backwards on the floor until my back hit the opposite wall. The portrait watched me cower. It didn't need to move its head anymore. It was already looking directly at me, its presence a physical force in the small room. The hunger in its eyes wasn't just for attention. It was for something deeper, for warmth, for life. for the soul that animated the body lying frozen on the floor before it. The thorny vines on the frame seemed to writhe with a life of their own, stretching subtly towards the edge of the canvas, towards the room, towards me. The silence was absolute, thick with the promise of the cold that would never leave, the watchfulness that would never end. I was home, and she was finally, truly looking at me, not just watching, claiming. The slow turning of her head at night was over. Her gaze was fixed, permanent, and the chilling realization settled into my bones, colder than the air, colder than death. I would never look away again. She wouldn't allow it. The portrait above my bed didn't just turn its head. It had turned me. And now I belonged to the silence, to the cold, to those endless, hungry eyes that would watch forever from the wall. And with that, this story comes to an end. Let's move on to the next one. I worked night shift in a museum. The mannequins started moving. The job posting was absurdly specific. Night security, Caldwell Museum of Regional History, 11 p.m., 5 a.m. Must be comfortable working alone. No prior experience required. 18 HR, cash, paid weekly. Cash, weekly, no background check. After the incident in Toledo, no charges, just a misunderstanding that cost me my teaching license and any hope of reference. I didn't ask questions. I showed up at 10:45 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October wearing black cargo pants, steel-toed boots, and a zip-up hoodie that still smelled faintly of smoke. The museum was a converted 1920s Carnegie Library, sandstone facade, arched windows, iron gates locked tight by day. By night, it loomed like a mausoleum. No lights inside, just the pale glow of street lamps catching the dust on the stained glass transom above the entrance. Mr. Voss met me at the side door, the staff entrance. A narrow metal door set into the foundation, painted the same grim green as the fire hydrants. He was small, wiry, late 60s, with a permanent squint and fingers stained with nicotine and something darker, ink maybe, or rust. He didn't offer his hand, just jingled a ring of keys and said, "You're late." "I'm early. 11 shift start. You're here at 10:45. That's 7 minutes of unsupervised access. Unacceptable." He handed me a laminated floor plan, hand-drawn, smudged, and a maglite so old the rubber grip had turned to glue. Patrol every hour, log time and location in the binder, front desk, main hall, east wing, colonial life, west wing, industrial era, basement storage. Do not enter the basement vault. Do not touch exhibits. Do not speak to the mannequins. I blinked. Come again? He stared at me, unblinking. They're props, but some guests project. You'll feel it. A presence, a weight. Ignore it. Walk past. Keep moving. Right, mannequins. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. If you hear tapping, 3 slow, 3 fast, 3 slow, radio me. Only then. He vanished into the night. I stepped inside. The air hit me first, cold, dry, sterile, like opening a long-sealed tomb. The scent was old paper, varnish, and beneath it, a faint, greasy odor. Machine oil and lanolin, the kind used to preserve leather. The lobby was dim, lit only by emergency exit signs casting bloody halos on the floor. A glass case held arrowheads and a rusted musket. Behind the front desk, a rotary phone sat beside a logbook bound in cracked leather. I opened it. Previous entries were neat, precise. 2302 Main Hall, 100.17 East Wing, until 3 nights ago. The last entry read, 0244. They're not supposed to turn their heads. I didn't do anything. Radio dead. Keys in desk. No signature. The next page was blank. I flipped back. Every log for the past 6 weeks ended abruptly. No. Shift complete. No initials. Just sudden silence. I started my first patrol. Main hall was 2 stories tall, dominated by a suspended Wright Flyer replica and a bronze statue of Senator Caldwell, one hand raised in benediction, the other holding a scroll. His eyes, glass painted a watery blue, followed me as I passed. Parallax, I told myself, trick of the light, east wing, colonial life. 3 dioramas. First, the hearth. A woman in a homespun dress kneaded dough on a pine table. A child, wooden, jointed, sat on a stool clutching a rag doll. The woman's head was tilted slightly downward, as if in concentration. Standard. Second, the study. A man in a powdered wig sat at a desk, quill in hand, penning a letter. His face was carved with deep lines. Weariness, wisdom, resolve. Third, the attic. This one unsettled me immediately. A single figure, a young woman, mid-20s, dressed in a simple calico dress, barefoot. She stood facing the far wall, arms at her sides, head bowed. No label, no description plaque. Just a small brass tag on the base. C. 1798. Anonymous. Acquired 1953. Her hair, real human hair, I realized with a jolt, hung in a single thick braid down her back. Her skin wasn't plaster, not plastic. It looked like wax. Ivory-colored, faintly translucent, with visible pores and the subtle blue tracery of veins at her temples, and her hands. Her fingers were slightly curled, not relaxed. Clasped, like she was holding something invisible. I moved on. West Wing, industrial era, looms, steam engines, a replica coal mine shaft with a minor mannequin, soot-streaked face, pickaxe over one shoulder, frozen mid-stride. His head was turned, not toward the exhibit label, toward the doorway. Where I'd just entered, I stopped, waited, nothing. Voss was right. Projection, isolation, stress. Back at the desk, I logged 2307 Main Hall. My handwriting looked shaky. Hour 2, east. Wing again. I paused at the hearth. The child's head was no longer facing forward. It was tilted up, staring at the woman. The woman's hands, before resting lightly on the dough, were now kneading. Deep, rhythmic presses. The dough, real flour and lard, preserved under UV-filtered glass, rippled with each motion. I stepped closer. The glass was cool. Inside, the woman's chest rose. Just once. A shallow, almost imperceptible inhalation. I backed away. Fast. West Wing. The miner. He'd moved. Not much. 6 inches forward. His pickaxe now rested on the ground, point down like he was leaning on it. His eyes, glass brown, flecked with gold, locked onto mine. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. Not from the miner, from the east wing. 3 slow taps. Tap, tap, tap. Then 3 fast. Tap, tap, tap. Then 3 slow. Tap, tap, tap. SOS. My blood turned to ice. Voss's words echoed. If you hear tapping, 3 slow, 3 fast, 3 slow. Radio me. I ran to the desk. The radio was a brick-sized Motorola circa 1989, antenna bent, volume knob crusted with grime. I keyed the mic. Mr. Voss? Voss, come in. I heard the signal. Static. Then a voice, not Voss. A woman's voice, young, calm. He won't answer. I dropped the radio. It clattered to the floor. The voice came from the speaker, not over the air. From inside the radio. He never answers after midnight. I kicked the radio under the desk, stood there, breathing hard. 23:58, 2 minutes to my next patrol. The museum was silent, too silent. No hum of HVAC, no distant traffic. just the low thrum of my own pulse in my ears. Midnight struck, not by clock, by sound. A deep, resonant gong, like a church bell muffled by earth, vibrated through the floorboards. Dust sifted from the ceiling tiles. Every light in the museum flickered, once, twice, then died. Emergency lights snapped on, dim, red, casting the halls in the color of a fresh wound. I grabbed the mag light. The beam was weak, yellow at the edges. I walked toward the east wing, slowly. Tap, tap, tap. SOS again, from the attic diorama. I stopped at the archway. The young woman was no longer facing the wall. She stood in the center of the small platform, facing me. Her head was up. Her eyes, open now, were not glass. They were real, pale gray, bloodshot, exhausted. Tears, clear, viscous, tracked down her waxen cheeks. Her lips moved, no sound, but I read them. Help me. I took a step forward. The glass cover over the diorama was gone, not broken, removed. She reached out. Her hand passed through the space where the glass should have been. Her fingers were cold, dry. They brushed my wrist. A jolt went through me, not electric. Memory. Images flooded my mind. A cellar, dirt floor, chains on the wall. A man's voice. You'll thank me. History needs witnesses. The smell of tallow and fever sweat. Needles, long, thin, bone-handled, injecting something thick and amber into her neck. The wax pouring, slow, steady, filling her mouth as she screamed. I stumbled back, gasping. She didn't follow, just stood there, tears falling, whispering with her eyes. Don't let him make another. I fled to the west wing. The miner was gone. His pickaxe lay on the floor. The coal mine shaft entrance, just a painted backdrop before, now gaped open, dark, real, a tunnel. From within, the sound of shoveling, scrape, scrape, thud. I ran to the basement door, the one marked storage, authorized personnel only. It stood ajar. A narrow stair descended into darkness. The smell hit me halfway down. Damp earth, formaldehyde, and that greasy lanolin, stronger now. The basement was a labyrinth of rolling storage racks, each holding crates, paintings wrapped in plastic, marble busts staring blankly from the gloom. At the far end, a vault door, steel, round, like a bank safe. It stood open. Inside, light, warm, golden light, and voices, not one, dozens, murmuring. I crept forward, peered in. The vault wasn't for artifacts. It was a workshop. Wooden tables lined the walls, covered in tools, scalpels, syringes, bone saws, bowls of amber fluid. Jars lined the shelves, not specimens. Eyes, hundreds of them, floating in formaldehyde, blue, brown, green, hazel, all human, all labeled with dates and initials. E.M., 1798, R.T., 1832, A.G., 1890, D.S., 1911, K.L., 1987, and at the end, J.M., 2020, my initials, my year. On the central table, a mannequin in progress, a man, late 30s, brown hair, hoodie, my face, carved in wax, unfinished. One eye socket empty. The other held a glass orb, pale gray, bloodshot. Her eye. A door creaked behind me. I turned. Mr. Voss stood in the vault entrance. He held a bone-handled syringe filled with amber liquid. No one believes witnesses, he said softly, but everyone believes history. He stepped forward. I backed into the workshop. My hand closed around a cold metal object on the table, a chisel. I swung. He dodged. The chisel struck a jar. Glass shattered. Formaldehyde and eyes spilled across the floor. The eyes didn't roll. They blinked and screamed. A high, keening wail, silent, but vibrating in my skull like a dentist's drill. Voss flinched. I ran, past the storage racks, up the stairs, into the west wing. The coal mine shaft was wider now. The shoveling had stopped. From the darkness, a figure emerged. The miner, but not as before. His face was peeling, wax sloughing off in grayish sheets, revealing raw, glistening muscle beneath. His mouth opened, not to speak, to unhinge, jaw dropping lower, lower, until his chin touched his chest. Inside, rows of needle teeth, and behind them, a second mouth, smaller, whispering. He promised us permanence. I ran for the east wing. The dioramas were empty. The hearth, dough flattened, table overturned. The study, chair on its side, quill snapped in two. The attic platform, empty, but the floor was wet. Footprints, bare feet, leading to the main hall. I followed. The main hall was transformed. The right flyer hung lower, cables straining. Senator Caldwell's statue was gone from its pedestal. In its place, her. The young woman. She stood tall now, arms outstretched, palms upturned. Around her, dozens of figures. The colonial woman, flour dusting her apron like snow. The child, doll gone, hands curled into fists. The studious man, wig askew, quill now a dagger in his belt. The miner, wax hanging in tatters, muscles gleaming wetly in the red light. All facing her, all waiting. She turned as I entered. Her tears were gone. Her eyes, clear, sharp, ancient. He preserves bodies, she said, her voice no longer a whisper, but full, resonant, echoing from the rafters. But we preserve truth. Voss appeared behind me, blocking the lobby exit. He held the syringe. Don't make me ruin you, he said. You could be magnificent. A teacher. A lesson. I looked at her, at the others, at the empty eye socket on my wax double, waiting in the vault. Why? I asked her. Because silence is the only thing he fears, she said, and we are very, very loud. She raised her hand. The others moved, not walking, unfolding, limbs extended, joints reversed, wax cracking like eggshells, revealing not bone, not muscle, but light. A soft, pulsing gold, the same as the vault. They surrounded Voss. He didn't scream, just stared transfixed as the colonial woman took the syringe, pressed it to his neck. Injected the amber fluid, he collapsed. Not dead. Changing. His skin paled, waxed, his eyes, still open, still terrified, clouded over. They carried him to the vault. I followed. They laid him on the central table. The young woman picked up a chisel, began to carve, not his face, his mouth, sealing it shut, stitch by stitch, with wax and wire. When she finished, she turned to me. "Stay," she said. "Guard the truth." I shook my head. "I need to leave. Tell—" "There is no out," she said gently. "Only in, or through." She pointed to the vault wall. Not stone. A door, old wood, iron-bound, no handle, just a keyhole shaped like an eye. "The archive," she said, "where the silenced go to be heard." She held out a key, bone, carved with tiny, screaming faces. "It only opens from this side." I took it. It was warm, pulsing, like a heart. I walked to the door. The others stepped back. I inserted the key. It turned with a sound like a sigh. The door swung inward, not darkness. Light, blinding, white, pure, and sound, 1,000 voices, singing, not in a harmony, in testimony. Names, dates, crimes, confessions, apologies. I stepped through. The door closed behind me. Silence. Then, a new voice, mine, speaking without moving my lips. "My name is Jacob Miller. I work night shift at the Caldwell Museum. I saw what they did. I saw who they were." The light dimmed. I stood in a vast white hall, infinite shelves stretched into forever. Each held a single book, bound in pale leather on the spines. Names: Eleanor Mayfield, Reverend Thomas Pike, Aloysius Green, and at the end of the first aisle, Jacob Miller, unwritten, waiting. A desk stood before it, an open book, a pen. I sat. The pen moved, not my hand. The truth. Words flowed onto the page, my memories, my fear, the amber fluid, the wax, the eyes. The pen paused. At the bottom of the first page, it wrote, "He is still down there, carving, preserving, lying." Then beneath it, "But we are here." Listening, remembering, waiting for the next witness to turn the key. I closed the book, stood, walked back to the door. It opened at my touch. The vault was empty. Voss's table was clean, the jars of eyes gone. Only my wax double remained, but its face was different, not mine, his, Voss's, mouth sealed shut, one eye, my eye, glass, pale gray, watching. The key was gone from my pocket. In its place, a new book, bound in pale leather, warm, pulsing. I walked upstairs. The museum was quiet, pristine, the dioramas restored. The hearth, woman kneading, child watching. The study, man writing, quill steady. The attic, young woman facing the wall, head bowed, hands clasped, as if nothing happened. I sat at the front desk, opened the logbook, wrote, 0312, East Wing, all exhibits secure. I didn't sign it, didn't need to. The next guard would find the book, the key, the truth, and when the tapping starts, 3 slow, 3 fast, 3 slow, he'll... No, it's not a signal for help. It's an invitation to remember, to witness, to join us. I lean back in the chair. The mag light beam dims. The red emergency lights pulse, and in the silence, I hear them, breathing, whispering, singing, not behind the glass, inside me. The wax is warm now, settling, filling the hollow places, making me whole, making me permanent, making me true. I close my eyes. The museum sighs, a deep, contented sound, like a body finally at rest. Outside, dawn bleeds gray at the windows. Another night done, another witness kept. I reach for the logbook, turn to a fresh page, pick up a pen. It's already moving, writing, for I think. They think they're guarding the past. But we are the past. And we are always watching. I smile. The mannequins don't move. They don't need to. They're already here, inside the walls, inside the glass, inside me, waiting for the next shift, waiting for the next lie, waiting to be remembered. The pen dips, forms one last line. Check-in is complete. I set it down, fold my hands, wait. The museum breathes, and I breathe with it. And with that, this story comes to an end. Let's move on to the next one. The house where every picture changes while you sleep. I never intended to stay in that house. It was the summer of 2023, and I just lost my job at the marketing firm in Chicago. Rent was due, and my savings were evaporating faster than morning dew on a hot sidewalk. I needed somewhere cheap, somewhere temporary, while I got back on my feet. That's how I ended up scrolling through listings on a dodgy sublet board called Room Rift, where people posted everything from converted garages to basement hideouts with no windows and questionable wiring. Most listings were scams or smelled like desperation. But then I saw it. Historic Victorian home, fully furnished room, 300 mo, utilities included, immediate occupancy. The photos showed a tall, narrow house, on the outskirts of a small town called Harrow's End, about 2 hours northwest of the city. It looked old, but well-maintained, with ornate woodwork, bay windows, and a wraparound porch sagging slightly under decades of Midwestern weather. The room for rent was on the second floor, spacious, with a clawfoot tub in the ensuite bathroom and a large window overlooking the overgrown backyard. The landlord, a woman named Evelyn Marsh, replied to my inquiry within minutes. "I don't usually rent out rooms," she wrote, "but the house has been empty since my husband passed. I'd rather someone live there than let it rot." She didn't ask for references, didn't run a credit check, just said to bring a month's rent in cash and show up Saturday morning. No lease, no questions. It should have been a red flag, but I was broke, exhausted, and the idea of a quiet place to regroup, somewhere I could write, reflect, maybe even start a novel, felt like salvation. So I packed my duffel bag, threw my laptop and a few changes of clothes in the trunk of my aging Honda Civic, and drove through the cornfields until the GPS whispered, "You have arrived." The house loomed at the end of a dirt road surrounded by dense woods. It was even more imposing in person, 3 stories of weathered gray clapboard with peeling paint and a turret on the left side that looked like something out of a Gothic fairy tale. The front porch creaked under my weight, and the screen door groaned like it hadn't been opened in years. Evelyn was waiting inside. She was in her late 60s, with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that didn't quite meet mine. She handed me a brass key on a frayed red ribbon. "Your room's at the top of the stairs, second door on the right," she said, voice dry as autumn leaves. "The others are locked. Don't try them." I nodded, too tired to question it. She didn't offer a tour, didn't say goodbye, just turned and walked down the hall toward the kitchen, her slippers whispering against the hardwood. The room was exactly as pictured, except for one thing I hadn't noticed before. The walls were covered in framed photographs, dozens of them, black and white and sepia-toned, some in ornate gilded frames, others in simple wood. Portraits of stiff-backed men in suits, women in high-collared dresses, children with solemn eyes, family gatherings on porches, picnics in fields, group shots in front of churches. None were labeled, none looked recent. Everything seemed to date from the late 1800s to the 1940s. I assumed they'd been left behind, part of the house's historic charm, as Evelyn called it. I didn't think much of it. I hung my clothes, plugged in my laptop, and collapsed onto the 4-poster bed. The mattress was firm but comfortable. Outside, crickets sang, and the wind rustled through the trees. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. I fell asleep almost instantly. I woke up to the sound of scratching, not loud, just a soft rhythmic scrape, like fingernails on glass. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked around. Moonlight filtered through the curtains. Everything was still. The scratching stopped. I told myself it was a branch against a window, or a raccoon on the roof. But then I glanced at the wall and froze. The photograph directly across from the bed, the one of a young girl in a white pinafore standing beside a wooden rocking horse, was different. In the original, her hands were clasped in front of her, eyes looking slightly off to the side. Now, her head was tilted toward the camera. Her fingers were splayed, as if reaching out. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, looked again. No, she was definitely looking straight at me now. I got up, walked over, and touched the frame. It was cool, unremarkable. I studied the photo under the dim glow of my phone flashlight. There was no trick of the light, no double exposure. It was the same print, but the girl's posture, her gaze, it had changed. My stomach turned. "Okay," I whispered. "This is ridiculous." I checked the other photos. All seemed unchanged. I took a picture of the girl with my phone for comparison and went back to bed, leaving the light on. The next morning, Evelyn wasn't in the house. A note on the kitchen counter read, "Gone to Sisters. Back in 3 days. Help yourself to pantry." I told myself I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation, stress. The mind plays tricks. But that evening, after writing for a few hours and eating a sad dinner of canned soup, I decided to document the photos, partly out of curiosity, partly to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. I spent 2 hours photographing every frame in the room. There were 47 in total. I uploaded them to a folder labeled House Photos Before, backed them up to the cloud, and went to sleep. I dreamed of whispers, voices layered over each other, too quiet to understand, rising and falling like wind through eaves, a child laughing, a woman sobbing, and beneath it all, a single phrase repeated, "Don't look away." I woke up drenched in sweat. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m., and every single photograph on the walls had changed, not just a girl. The stern-faced man in the top hat now had his mouth open in a silent scream. The picnic group, once smiling, were all staring at the camera with hollow eyes. In the portrait of a wedding couple, the bride's veil had been torn, and dark stains spread across her chest like blood. I scrambled out of bed, hands shaking, and pulled up the photos I'd taken the night before. Side by side, the differences were undeniable. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't my imagination. The pictures had changed while I slept. I grabbed my phone, paced the room, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone had swapped them, but the doors were locked. The windows hadn't been touched. And even if someone had broken in, how could they replicate 47 vintage photos with subtle alterations in a single night? No, this house was doing something. That's when I noticed the mirror above the dresser. In it, my reflection looked wrong. My eyes were darker, my hair was slightly longer, and behind me in the reflection of the wall, one of the photos showed me, standing in the room, wearing pajamas, back turned, staring at the bed. But I wasn't in that position. I spun around. The actual photo on the wall was still the wedding couple, but in the mirror it showed me. I backed away from the mirror so fast I tripped over the rug. I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, I was a wreck. I considered leaving, packing up and driving back to the city, even if it meant sleeping in my car. But where would I go? I had no money, no job, and part of me, a stupid, stubborn part, wanted to understand. So I stayed. I started researching the house. The town library was small but had archives. I learned that the home was built in 1889 by a man named Silas Harrow, a wealthy industrialist who made his fortune in timber. He lived there with his wife and 5 children. All 5 children died before the age of 12, one from diphtheria, one drowned in the creek behind the property, another fell from the turret window. The last 2 vanished during a winter storm in 1903 and were never found. Silas went mad with grief. Locals claimed he took photographs of the children every day, even after their deaths, setting their clothes in chairs and propping up dolls to filled a frame. After his wife hanged herself in the attic, Silas sealed every room except the nursery and lived there alone until his death in 1921. The house passed through distant relatives, but no one stayed long. People reported hearing children running through the halls at night, doors opening by themselves, and the photos, always the photos, changing. One woman claimed the faces in the pictures began to follow her. Another said she woke up one morning to find her own face in an old family portrait from 1897. She left that same day. I should have too, but I didn't. Instead, I became obsessed. I started sleeping with my phone recording a time-lapse video of the walls. I set up motion sensors. I even tried staying awake for 2 full nights, watching the photos like a hawk. Nothing happened while I was conscious, but the moment I closed my eyes, even for 10 minutes during a nap, the changes occurred. The girl in the pinafore now held a small dark object in her hand. A knife? A doll? Too blurry to tell? The wedding bride stains had spread. Now her entire torso was blackened, and new photos appeared. Not replacements, additions. Framed pictures I didn't recognize showed up overnight, tucked between the originals. One showed a man hanging from the attic rafters, his face obscured by shadow. Another depicted a child's hand emerging from beneath a bed, fingers curled like claws. I began to dread sleep, but exhaustion always won, and each morning the horror deepened. One night I woke to the sound of breathing, not mine, soft, wet, right beside my ear. I didn't move, didn't open my eyes, pretended to still be asleep. The breathing grew louder, closer, then a cold hand brushed my cheek. I screamed and lashed out, but there was no one there. When I turned on the light, the photo of the picnic group had changed again. Now, in the center of the image, someone had been added, a figure in modern clothing, jeans, a gray t-shirt, tousled hair. Me, standing among them, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in a silent cry. I was in the photograph. I had never posed for it. I tore it off the wall and threw it across the room. It shattered against the baseboard. But the next morning, it was back, frame intact, glass unbroken, and my image was clearer now. I could see the sweat on my brow, the fear in my eyes. That's when I realized the house wasn't just changing the photos. It was recording me, absorbing me. Piece by piece, night by night, I was becoming part of its collection. I tried to leave 3 times. The first time, my car wouldn't start. The battery was dead, though it had been fine the day before. The second time, I walked out the front door at dawn, suitcase in hand, and found myself back on the porch 10 minutes later, disoriented, with no memory of turning around. The third time, I made it all the way to the edge of the woods. But the road, it kept curving back toward the house, like the land itself wouldn't let me go. Evelyn returned on the 4th day. She found me in the kitchen, hollow-eyed, clutching a mug of cold coffee. "You've seen them, haven't you?" she said, not unkindly. I nodded. She sighed and sat across from me. My husband, he thought the photos were beautiful. He used to say they were alive with memory. Then one night, he walked into his study and never came out. When I found him, he was sitting in his chair, staring at the wall. His eyes, they were open but empty, like he'd been pulled out through them. She looked up at me, her gaze heavy. "The house doesn't want you to leave. It's choosing you." "Why?" I whispered. "Because you're alone, because you're afraid, because you notice it." She leaned forward. It feeds on attention, on fear. The more you look, the more it takes. I asked her why she rented to me. She didn't answer, just stood and walked away. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight it. I wouldn't run. I would watch. I laid in bed with my eyes wide open, staring at the photos, refusing to blink. Hours passed. My eyes burned. My mind screamed for rest, but I held on. At 2:33 a.m., the lights flickered. Not just in my room, in the whole house. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floorboards. Then slowly, every photograph on the walls began to turn. Not the images, the actual frames. They rotated on their hooks, one by one, until every single one faced the bed. Every eye in every portrait locked onto me. Even the ones with no faces, just shadows, silhouettes, empty chairs, felt like they were watching. And then, from the hallway, I heard footsteps, light, skipping steps, the kind a child would make. They stopped outside my door. The knob turned. I didn't move. The door creaked open. Nothing there. But in the mirror across the room, I saw her. The girl from the pinafore. She stood behind me close enough that I could feel her breath on my neck. In the mirror, she smiled. Her teeth were black. Her eyes were mine. I closed my eyes. Just for a second, just to make it stop. When I opened them, I was no longer in the bed. I was in the photograph. Standing among the picnic group, frozen in time, screaming silently as the house sealed me in. And from the bed, my body sat up, empty-eyed, smiling, and began to take down another frame from the wall. There's a new photo now. It shows a man in a gray T-shirt sitting on a 4-poster bed, staring at the camera with wide, terrified eyes. He looks just like me, but I'm not him anymore. I'm the one watching. And if you ever rent a cheap room in an abandoned house, don't look at the pictures. Don't sleep. Because once you do, the house will remember you, and it never forgets.